Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I'm bringing you guys another Walking Dead What If. Now this one is probably one of the most requested and most covered what if scenarios on the show, and that is something to do with Shane surviving his encounter with Rick in season 2. Whether it's what if Shane survived just blatantly, what if Shane rejoined the group and turned good, or what if he killed Rick, which is actually what is going to be happening in this scenario. That's right, we're going to be talking about if Shane had actually successfully killed Rick instead of vice versa in season 2, episode 12. So, dramatic spoilers for the entire series. Obviously, I've already just spoiled what happens in season 2. So yeah, make sure you check out the show if you haven't already. It's on Netflix, usually. Just watch it. It's worth your time. But anyway, time to get into what is probably the most requested Walking Dead What If now. So we start off in season 2, episode 12 of the show, with Rick and Shane out in the field. This time, when Rick tries to talk Shane down, Shane is going to recognize this as a police tactic. Him realizing this allows for him to see Rick's plan of stabbing him coming, so when he hands him the gun, Shane will shoot him right there. This causes Rick to fall to the ground as he swings his knife, and Shane's feelings are going to be very weird here. He was a very ambiguous character as to how much he cared for Rick in that moment, so I'm not going to pretend like I know what he would say to him. I get the feeling Rick would try and use his dying breaths to say something positive to Shane though, maybe telling him that there was a way back. Anyway, Shane sits with Rick in his last moments before Carl walks up. This time, he sees his father dead and runs over to him crying. Carl didn't know that Rick killed Shane until after he revealed it to the group, so he's not going to know that Shane killed Rick here either. Shane tells Carl that they need to head out, but the boy is very hesitant to leave. This forces Shane to try and continue urging him to go, which leads to Rick coming back as a walker and attacking Carl. Shane had no idea this was going to happen as he didn't believe Rick was bitten, so he quickly reaches for his gun and shoots Rick in the head. With the 2 shots ringing out, Shane tells Carl that they need to get out of there, but Carl asks what happened. Shane tells the boy that they got attacked by Randall and that's why Rick was shot. He tried taking him back, but he bled out along the way. Shane then hands Rick's revolver to Carl, and the 2 head toward the farm. After that, the season finale would go the same, just with Shane replacing Rick. So Shane and Carl burn down the barn and stuff like that. They basically get this really cool dynamic where they're working together. Though when Shane sees Herschel fighting off the walkers on his porch, he decides to save him in order to make him seem more favorable to Maggie and Beth, rather than what Rick did, which was just genuinely saving Herschel. But if Shane saves their father, they will probably forget his past actions and elect him as the new leader of the group. So he saves the old man, taking him in a vehicle with Carl. The rest of the group is able to find each other, and the people begin to wonder where Rick is. But Daryl already has the answer. He reveals what he and Glenn saw last night. Randall was dead, with footprints following him. He had his neck snapped, and there was blood on a tree. This immediately indicates that Shane's whole story was a complete lie, as there's no way Randall would have gotten the jump on Rick and then also been found by Daryl at the same time as a walker. And even if that were the case, the footprints and the blood on the tree, none of it makes any sense. Shane tries to defend himself, laughing and asking if they really thought he'd kill his best friend, but Daryl simply replies that they weren't really friends anymore. They constantly argued and fought. There's only one clear answer as to how Rick and Shane go off together, and only one comes back. Shane realizes what is about to happen, so he tries grabbing Carl and aims his gun at everyone. He tells him that he's just going to take Lori and Carl and go, but realistically, this is not going to go well for him. The entire group is against him, so he's either going to be killed or outcasted. I'll say he gets forced away in order to keep the story going. So Shane is basically forced out on his own, and so he wanders off. But that doesn't mean he's gone for the story. We'll come back to him in a bit, but first I want to talk about how the group is without Rick, and you need to get used to this as well. We're going to be switching back and forth from Shane and the group multiple times throughout the series. Meanwhile, the group realizes that they're in shambles, and none of them can agree on what to do. Glenn also reveals that Randall turned into a walker despite having no bites, so that means you don't have to be bitten to turn. I think Carol would want Daryl to take up a leading position, but Daryl is not all about that. Especially not in season 2. Glenn also hasn't really matured enough yet to step up either, so I think T-Dog would propose a better way. If none of them can fill Rick's shoes, then they'd work together. In the comics, when Rick becomes unhinged, the group made a council. So let's say they do that here. T-Dog, Daryl, and Glenn are the 3 leaders, as they're the ones who are the most fit. Daryl is just an all-around strong guy and good survivor, Glenn is very resourceful, and T-Dog is human enough to make smart calls. So they'll work it out somehow. Anyway, the 8-month time skip would still occur with the group all surviving and still finding the prison. Because none of them quite have the leadership skills of Rick, it would take more deliberating to come up with a plan to clear out the prison, but their plan does eventually end up the same. It would also take a lot longer to accomplish and have a few close calls since they're missing the extra man. Though I think this would probably inspire Carol to step up more. Anyway, we need to get back to Shane as promised. So I think at some point, Shane would meet up with Michonne and Andrea. This is pretty good for him as now he has that connection from before. Knowing that he's lost his hold on Lori and Carl, he's gonna do his best to forget them and move on as he needs to focus on his survival. This leads to him kind of rekindling that fling he had with Andrea before. He tries his best to find the same love he has for Lori in Andrea, but this doesn't quite work. He also never tells Andrea about what he did. He just says that he got separated from the group the same as her. Michonne is very skeptical of Shane, feeling like there's more to him than he's letting on, but she can never really place it. So the three survive together for a while, with Shane trying to lead them. Michonne doesn't like the whole leadership idea though, so Shane is even less of a friend to her. It's mainly just both her and Shane care about Andrea, so that's why they stick together. The three eventually get found by Merle and the governor's group, and Shane is very hesitant to go along with Merle. But he doesn't really have much choice as Andrea is sick and fighting back won't do them any good. So Merle takes them back to Woodbury, where they are welcomed by the governor. Of course, like Michonne, our big dog Shane is not chilling with the governor at all. Not only does he have a general suspicion about him, but over time he can see that Andrea is beginning to fall for him. And he definitely does not like that at all. Again, Andrea is more than just someone Shane likes a little. She is what helps him forget and move on from his insane possession over Lori and Carl. If he loses her, he will regress to his old self. So when Michonne tries to get her to leave, Shane does the same, but it fails and he reluctantly chooses to stay with her. Michonne goes off alone and gets attacked by Merle and his goons, but is saved by none other than Shane. He attacks Merle from behind and the two get into a scrap, but because Shane had the advantage, he's able to pull a gun on Merle and take him down. But he decides to leave him alive, so that way now he can confess what happened and take him back to Woodbury. Michonne agrees to go back as well since she wants to prove to Andrea what she saw in the governor's twisted ways. Shane forces his way back into Woodbury by threatening Merle, and this leads to him telling all the people what the governor's men tried to do. Of course, Philip denies this, asking if they'd really believe some strangers and citing all the positive things he's done. Shane calls his bluff, and Andrea is quickly confused and not knowing what to do, but she believes her friend. So she manages to convince the governor to let all three of them go in exchange for Merle. The plan succeeds, and so Michonne, Shane, and Andrea go back on the road together. Meanwhile, at the prison, a lot of stuff happens. Herschel gets bitten on the leg, the gang meets the prisoners, and even has some problems with them. They chop off Herschel's leg, as I still think they would have planned for that, and Carol manages to save his life just barely. Glenn kind of takes up the role of Rick here, since Rick isn't here to make them stay with Herschel. Tomas still ends up killing Big Tiny when he gets bitten, and tries to kill Glenn as well. But I think that Glenn wouldn't just kill him, and instead he'd explain what Tomas did, so Daryl would kill him instead with the crossbow. Then Andrew tries attacking him, but is stopped by Glenn. When Andrew runs inside, Glenn lets him in, since he hasn't really done that much. The group lets the three remaining prisoners go back into their new cell block, but then they want to join the real group. T-Dog ends up being the only one to accept them though, so he gets outvoted. I do think Andrew would get pretty angry about this, so he'd set up the walkers like he did originally. This leads to the deaths of both T-Dog and Lori, and Judith is also born at the same time. When Daryl and Oscar go to the generator room, Andrew attacks Daryl, which leads to Oscar using Daryl's crossbow to shoot Andrew. After realizing that they lost two members of their group, Glenn becomes pretty angry at himself that he didn't just leave Andrew to die. Although little does he know that if he had done that, the same result would have happened. So now we can move on to when Glenn and Maggie go on their supply run. From the corner, Shane would see them while he, Andrea, and Michonne were passing through. He knows that he can't let Andrea go near them, so he tells them to wait up, and that they can pass through once Maggie and Glenn go inside the building. But Michonne senses that something is up, so she walks ahead and sees the two. On top of that, she also catches a sight of Merle, who has now also showed up. He surprises Glenn and Maggie like he did canonically, and they talk. Andrea overhears Glenn's voice talking about Daryl, and so she makes herself known as well, aiming her gun at Merle, and Shane follows and does the same. At that point, Merle is just laughing. Not only has he found Glenn, but also the people he was looking for as well. Glenn and Maggie also see Shane, and Glenn gets angry. So now everyone has guns on everyone, and this allows Merle to take advantage of the confusion and grab Maggie. Glenn, Andrea, and Shane all have their guns aimed, but Glenn yells at them to drop them so that they can save Maggie. Shane reluctantly agrees, looking off and nodding, annoyed. Merle picks Maggie up and starts walking backward toward the front seat, but as he's talking about how they're going to do this nicely, a sword slices his throat. Blood would begin to pour onto Maggie as she frees herself, and Merle falls to the ground. From behind him is Michonne, who had snuck around behind him. So now Merle bleeds out on the ground, and everyone reunites. But Glenn is still angry at Shane for killing Rick, so he tells the truth to Andrea. Upon learning of Shane's lies, Andrea is completely disgusted, and this confirms Michonne's prior suspicions. Just when she was starting to work together with him too. Shane, realizing that he's had everyone turn against him once again, asks if Lori and Carl are still alive. Maggie says that Lori died, but she had a baby. Glenn butts in and says that that's all they're telling him, and that they're gonna leave now. So Andrea and Michonne join Glenn and Maggie and go to the prison. Shane is left on his own once again, not quite knowing where to go. He could try and follow them, but doing that won't help him. Unless... He realizes what he's going to do now and chases after them on foot, trying not to be seen. Once they return to the prison, he realizes where they're located, and so he heads back the way he came. Daryl and the gang reunite with Andrea and meet Michonne. They also have found Carol by this point as well, so that's a dub. Glenn tells Daryl that they had to kill Merle, and this makes Daryl both sad and angry. Of course, he doesn't blame him, his brother probably had it coming. But he needs to see it for himself. So he heads out and finds Merle as a walker. He seemed to have been following something, but Daryl didn't really notice. He began crying and started fighting with the walker like he did with Merle's original death. Daryl ends up killing his zombified brother, but after a little bit of crying, he is then hit in the head and falls unconscious. Shane looks down at him, picking him up and putting him on Daryl's bike, and driving back to Woodbury. After capturing Daryl and going to Woodbury, Shane requests a seat with the governor. He has some key info that he might like to have. Before he unveils that information though, he tells him first that Merle is dead. Michonne killed him. But he might not need Merle anymore now that he's here. Eventually, the governor does agree to listen to what he has to say, and he informs him of the location of the prison and tells them that Michonne and Andrea are both there. The guy he brought with him on his way back to Woodbury was Merle's brother, Daryl, and he's currently locked up right now. He and Daryl were in a group together at the start, but they split paths, and now that group is currently at the prison. They could use this as a perfect way to get Michonne and Andrea back, and Shane has an interest in it as well. He wants Carl. Philip thinks on this, asking what Shane thinks they should do. He replies that they should use Daryl as bait, then take the people he wants. Some sort of trade. The governor asks how he's supposed to know it's not a trap from Shane, and Shane had literally just tried to turn everyone against him as he's run with that group before. To that, he replies that he doesn't know how to make him trust him, and in all honesty, he doesn't care. But their goals here are connected, and with his help, they can achieve them. I do think that the governor would take some time to think on it as he hadn't fully turned just yet, which would take a couple days. They know with Daryl missing, Andrea and Michonne will probably mention that he could have been taken by Shane or someone else since they encountered him on the road. And yeah, this is precisely what happens. But a good note is that Tyrese's group are welcomed into the prison thanks to Rick not being there and going insane. So now the prison group has Tyrese, Sasha, Alan, and Ben, and with Shane and the governor possibly teaming up, it's good that they didn't go to Woodbury this time. The group going to get Daryl back would be Michonne, Andrea, Oscar, and Glenn. It was a 4-person squad originally, so it would be here too. It would take much longer to find out where Daryl is being held, since there wouldn't be any bullets fired. I mean, there's no point in trying to kill Daryl like they did with Glenn and Maggie, as they're using him for leverage. The squad eventually finds where he is though, and they throw a smoke bomb. They then get Daryl out of there, and Shane goes on the hunt for them. Daryl isn't injured at all since, yet again, there'd be no reason for it if he's their leverage. Oscar dies in this fight, but the rest of them make it out of there, except for Andrea, who goes back to find out where Michonne is, as she had disappeared earlier. To her surprise, Michonne is engaged in a battle with the governor, stabbing his eye out with her sword. Luckily for him, Andrea is able to stop her by telling her that there has to be some way they can work this out. They can't keep on killing each other. Even after Shane exposed him for everything, there's blood on both sides now. Michonne cut his eye, killed his walker daughter, and killed his men. They've done enough. Andrea all but forces Michonne to leave before telling Philip that he needs to stop this as well. As she goes to walk out, she is stopped by Shane. He forces her to put her gun down and puts her in the prison area Daryl was in before. I don't see the governor putting her into the pits to fight, as the main reason he did that was just because it was Daryl and Merle. But here, it's only Andrea. Once Michonne finds out Andrea didn't follow her, she tells Glenn and Daryl, and so they reluctantly go back and save Andrea. I think this would work, but someone would probably get shot somewhere and be wounded. After this, the governor finally agrees to Shane's plan to work together, although they don't have the leverage anymore. But that's alright, as Shane has a new plan. They go to the prison and wipe out everyone except for Carl and Laurie's baby. That's the plan. After our group has all gotten back together at the prison, they are able to chill for a bit. Glenn and Maggie go out on another run together since Maggie wasn't traumatized this time, as Merle hadn't taken them and basically forced them to be abused. Once they leave, a surprise attack is made and the governor kills Axel like in canon. This battle will be a little bit different from the original in some ways. You see, while the governor may have an extra man in Shane, the prison has a lot more people here this time. They don't have Rick or Maggie currently, but they do have Tyrese, Sasha, Alan, Ben, Daryl, and Andrea. And by the way, Tyrese had agreed that their group would help them in any encounters with other groups in the actual show, so I think that this would apply here as well. So while I don't see the governor dying or any sort of thing like that, they would manage to clear out the walkers and kill the guy in the perch much faster. And so the governor and Shane retreat with Martinez back to Woodbury. I do see Andrea taking kind of a leading role here, as she doesn't want more on either side to die. Glenn and Daryl both want to get justice for Rick and Merle. Daryl forgave Michonne for killing his brother, as she really didn't have a choice, but the governor was the one who sent Merle out, so therefore, he's the one responsible for putting him in that spot. Back at Woodbury, Milton would be unable to finish his research without the help of Andrea. And also, without Rick, the idea of going back near his hometown wouldn't ever come up, so the gang never meets up with Morgan and get more guns. Instead, Andrea would go to Woodbury and try to negotiate something, so the governor agrees to sit down with one person from their group and talk it out. While Daryl would be the most fired up, that isn't exactly a good thing when they're trying to make peace. I think Herschel would be the best choice here, and the characters would also agree. So he agrees to speak with the governor, but of course the governor refuses to make any concessions whatsoever, and only wants the prison group to give up. Herschel seems to be up for that idea in canon, but no one else really was except for Carol. He tries to tell them that their people don't need to fight anymore and that everyone is willing to make peace. Herschel tries to explain that there's a baby with them and that they need this place, and that catches the attention of the governor. He asks whose baby it is, as he's curious to know why Shane wants it and Carl so bad. Herschel replies that it's the former leader of the group's daughter, but he was killed by Shane. The governor now connects the dots and makes a final agreement. He'll accept peace only if they give him Andrea, Michonne, Carl, and the baby. The last two are for Shane, of course. Herschel refuses this, but the governor leaves him to think about it. He is honest with the group, unlike Rick, but I do not see Herschel taking this deal at all. Also, whether you think the governor would actually do this or not doesn't really matter, because if you don't think he would do this, him making this offer just makes him seem more reasonable because he's actually willing to talk down a little bit from his original price, but obviously the group is never going to take that deal. But with the prison group's lower weaponry, war seems off the table, so they send more people out to find more weapons, hoping that there is some way they can make this work. The results of these runs aren't much, as I don't think they would just randomly be a gun cache, so their only hope now is to wait it out. They can make a counterattack on the governor when he makes his attack. This is their only shot without losing the prison or their people. Michonne was stated to want to make an attack first, so I think that she would choose to make a similar attack to Merle in canon. Though she would leave when things get too risky, so she wouldn't rack in nearly as many kills, but it does mean she survives, unlike Merle did in canon. Milton is never inspired by Andrea to sabotage the governor, so he isn't killed by him, and continues to work for him. Andrea also never gets attacked or imprisoned by him, since she's already out of prison. So when the governor does eventually make his attack, the prison group counters, though it would be less successful due to them not having nearly as much weaponry or ammo. Plus, the governor has Shane, so I will say that Alan and Ben are both killed here. They died in the canon season 3, so having them killed first makes the most sense. At the end, Philip retreats and guns down all of his men except for Shane and Martinez. But I think Shane will see this as an incredibly stupid idea. These people were a strong army, gunning them all down was such a waste on so many levels. So as the governor continues firing, another gunshot rings out. The governor quickly slows his firing down and grabs at his stomach, which is now spewing blood. Philip turns to see Shane holding his gun as he falls to the ground. He then dies, and the few that remain praise Shane. To this, he replies by saying that he will be their leader now and that they should go back to Woodbury. They do so, and this means that Woodbury stays intact attacked in this version of events, and now Shane is the new governor. With this, he quickly decides how to make another attack, as the group must be low on ammunition now, otherwise they would have been able to stop them from killing those two guys, Alan and Ben. So Shane goes to the prison and basically just kidnaps Michonne and Herschel. This is very similar to what the governor did in season 4, only it's happening much earlier. This will have some unintended consequences later on. Shane now leads a hostage situation to get them to make a trade. He doesn't care about Michonne or Andrea anymore. That was the governor's thing. He just wants Carl and the baby. The group knows that they can't spare any more ammo for this battle, and without Rick's speech, I don't see anything happening to get Shane to stand down. And so the only thing that can happen here is them trying to fight back with what little they have, and then escape. They attempt this plan, but it really just would not even be close. Instead, we'd see Andrea trying to appeal to Shane with a talk of her own. She tries to talk about Shane's past with the group and how everything was so much better before, and that things could be like that again. Maybe not the same way, but if their two communities can just live in peace, then everything would be great. Keep in mind, Woodbury isn't even destroyed. Nobody went back and got all those guys. Everybody's still there. So they don't even have to do the we can all live together thing. They can just live apart and not hurt each other. It fails, so Shane kills Herschel and Andrea is shot in the leg. Shane eventually pushes the attack and finds Andrea on the ground trying to make her surrender, but she fights him. This forces him to fight back, and she's not going to be winning that fight at all. Shane will beat her down until she can't fight back anymore. Kinda brutal, but at this point Shane's losing his marbles, so bro does not care. Tyrese would be killed by 2 soldiers since Lizzie and Mika aren't there to defend him. Kinda sad to say that, but they were really important to keeping him alive in season 4. Since Shane beat Andrea down already, when Michonne attacks, he's gonna be ready to fight back. This leads to her being shot in the shoulder as well, and Shane being cut slightly on the leg. The two ultimately end up stalemating, and Michonne tries retreating with the wounded Andrea. But this fails, and Andrea is shot fatally, forcing Michonne to leave her behind. Because the prison flu hasn't happened yet, Glenn would be okay, and will escape with Sasha and Maggie. Also, since Carol hasn't been exiled, she would be with Carl and Judith. And so with that, the group has all retreated, leaving a ruined prison. Without Tyrese, Lizzie, or Mika there, having Carl and Carol take up Judith is kind of the best option. They can be in that group. So now that Shane has achieved victory, he takes his people back to Woodbury and focuses on the prosperity of his new home. After the war with Woodbury, our prison group is left in more shambles than in canon. But because there's fewer of them, they kind of flock together a little bit easier. Our groups are Glenn, Sasha, and Maggie, Carol, Carl, and Judith, Daryl, and Beth, and lastly, Michonne and Michonne, it's just her. And of course, we've got Shane, Martinez, and the Woodbury group all still alive and well and preparing to set up the prison as some sort of extra base. You see, the original season 4 was placed 6 months after season 3's ending. But because Shane's attack took place only a few days after the season 3 finale, it will make some of the events of season 4 change quite a bit. The results of this are that Beth wouldn't be taken by the hospital people, since it'd be very unlikely for them to go to the same location months earlier. Or at the very least, the timing would have to be literally perfect for them to intertwine again, which I just don't think makes much sense. Another change is that the Claimers also wouldn't be around that area for another 6 months, so they're out of the picture for our group as well. And while this does seem nice so far, this also means Abraham, Eugene, and Rosita won't appear yet either. That's not mentioning multiple other members of the group such as Lizzie and Mika, who we'll talk about later. I want to cover all of the season 4 changes first, and then we'll get to Woodbury and Shane. Since they're more like pushed to the side and they're off doing their own thing, it's more important to focus on the things that are actually happening within the canon story. So with that, the group will still be trying to make it to Terminus, as I do think the signs would still be around at this time. Her will try and take more care of Carl since she isn't as injured as Rick was. Michonne also bumps into them at some point as well, so that's pretty neat. Glenn, Sasha, and Maggie eventually find some Terminus signs and end up thinking that the group may have gone there. By the end, all of our groups, with the exception of Daryl and Beth, would make it to Terminus and be taken by Gareth and his people. I think Daryl and Beth will take the role of both Tyrese and Carol here. They find where Martin is and take his walkie-talkie, hearing that his place just found a ton of people. So they decide that they need to go there to try and save what they assume is their group. Carol ties Martin up and basically just takes Carol's original role of blowing up Terminus and saving everyone. By the time he's done doing that, Martin has managed to overpower Beth and cut himself free. So when Daryl opens the door to get Beth, he is off-guarded by Martin. Who then go at it with Martin now having the advantage. Thankfully, Beth comes in with the save, hitting a melee weapon into Martin's head, then gets the upper hand and finishes the guy off. Afterward, the two go off to find the group, successfully saving all of them. Then go on with their travels from there, meeting Gabriel and taking refuge in his church. Later on, they go out on a supply run and find the food bank with the help of Gabriel. Since Bob isn't there, Gabriel's cowardice will get Sasha bitten instead. I think this fits the best as Sasha is still reeling from the death of her brother Tyrese. After returning to the church, Sasha would go outside later that night and get attacked by Gareth and his people. She would wake up to find her leg eaten and would take on the role for the tainted meat scene. Termites are disgusted after they find out about her bite, so they knock her out and toss her back to the church. The group brings her inside, and Gareth and his people attack, but our group is able to apprehend them. Though it would likely be much more difficult considering how many people they're missing. They then kill Gareth and the others, though probably not as brutally. And the group now says their goodbye to Sasha before putting her down and burying her. With that, I feel it's important to cover who we have in our current group as it has undergone big changes. It currently consists of Glenn, Carl, Carol, Daryl, Maggie, Beth, Michonne, and Gabriel. Oh yeah, and also Judith. So we're missing Sasha and Tyrese, Abraham, Rosita, Eugene, Tara, as well as Rick. Bob is gone, but he's not dead this time since the group hasn't met him. So basically, we've just had the Terminus arc pushed way earlier into the story due to them leaving the prison early. Without the idea to go to DC, the group would probably stay at the church for a while just to process all of the tragedies that they've endured. They eventually run low on food, so they decide to go back out once again. All of them end up being found by Aaron, since he has always gone out looking for people, so him showing up earlier makes perfect sense. The group treats him much nicer than Rick originally did, and they end up taking him up on his offer to go to Alexandria. They arrive and everything seems to be going well for them there. Glenn would be going on runs with Nicholas, Aiden, and their other group that got killed in the original story. It still happens due to the stupidity of Nicholas and Aiden, only Glenn is a witness of that and tells Deanna, but of course Nicholas and Aiden tell her that it was Glenn's fault and that he wanted to frame it on them. Without Rick, we would probably see Carol taking a more active role in Jesse's situation. After all, she was the one who told Rick that Pete was abusive and also had a really cool interaction with him in another episode. So it would most likely result in Pete attacking Carol, but she is able to defend herself and pull out a stolen gun. She doesn't shoot the guy, but she aims it at him and has a similar moment to Rick where she is seen by everyone. She would tell Deanna that Pete was abusive and that they need to prepare for people and the dead attacking. She wouldn't be as forceful about it like Rick was, so she isn't going to get knocked out. However, she does refuse to turn over her gun. Deanna is quite upset with this, but Carol didn't go crazy like Rick, so she would have bigger matters to attend to at the moment. I do still think in the ceremony where they decide whether or not they're going to kick Carol out, he would come in and still kill Reg, to which Deanna gives Carol the okay to shoot him. She does so, and all that plays out quite nicely. And again, this is all far sooner than in the original story, but I think it makes sense for Carol to still find out these things. After all, it'd be really weird if Pete only started his abuse when Rick showed up. Granted, I do still think a good bit of time would have passed before this happened, so we're probably a few months off from the start of Season 4 canonically, but interestingly enough, we're already jumping into the start of Season 6. The group would begin training the Alexandrians, but there wouldn't be a herd or wolves to deal with for quite some time. But now that our main group is at a stopping point, we can finally see how Shane is doing in Woodbury. As the new governor, I would see Shane making the fight arenas illegal, at least with walkers. Letting people fight could be a good if they need to exile anybody, and also it keeps their training gains high. Milton's research would be shut down immediately by Shane, as he didn't want any walkers in their town whatsoever. Now, something to go over really quick is that all the characters who joined the prison group after Season 3 are a bit confusing on where they came from. It's important to note that we don't really have a lot of information as to where a lot of them come from. There are obvious ones like Karen, who was 100% from Woodbury because she was with the governor, or Bob, who we see gets picked up on the road by Daryl through flashbacks, but lots of them don't have specified backgrounds. These being characters who showed up at the prison, such as Dr. S, Ryan Samuels and his two daughters Lizzie and Mika, and probably a few others that we don't really see. It's possible that they could all be from Woodbury and that the group picked them up in the Season 3 finale, as it'd be reasonable to assume the governor wouldn't send a doctor to go fight. Or maybe Ryan was exempted from battles due to his daughters. However, it's also plausible that these were just people the group found during the 6-month time like they did with Bob. Personally, I lean more toward more of them being from Woodbury, so we're just gonna go with that. But if you disagree, I'd just say that they find Woodbury instead of the prison, since it isn't abandoned. So no matter what, all these extra characters still end up at Woodbury this time. Anyway, back to what I was saying, I would see Shane training everyone in the town, even including the children like Lizzie and Mika. While the people are against this at first, they would eventually come to understand why this is necessary. They might get into another war at some point, so it's important that they know how to survive, and any opposition would just be shut down by Shane immediately if they try to disagree. Other important characters who are still alive would be Ryan, or Lizzie and Mika's father, Dr. S, Karen, David, and Martinez. With that checkup done, let's go and see how some of our other characters are doing. Tara and her family will be kind of taking an L since they don't have the governor to help them. Because he isn't there to kill Tara and Lily's father after he turns, he ends up trying to bite Tara. Luckily, Lily stops him, but it leads to her being bitten instead. The two then work together to kill the walker, crying all the way through. After being bitten, Lily knows that she will die and turn, so she forces Tara to take Megan and leave her behind. They reluctantly do so after some arguing, and end up meeting the militia as they did in the original story. The only difference is that they're not led by Martinez since he's currently in Woodbury. At the Grady Memorial Hospital, Noah would sadly be stuck there since Beth never got taken by them in this timeline. A character who would be very important soon is Morgan, so let's deal with what's happening with him. He still ends up meeting Eastman, who teaches him Aikido, and accidentally gets him killed as well. He would then begin his journey to find Rick as he does in canon, but there are some changes. 1, he wouldn't ever get the map with Rick's name on it since Abraham didn't meet the group. And 2, there would be other people around the area like the Claimers since the squad never encountered them. So I think Morgan would likely meet with the Claimers on his journey to find Rick and would be attacked by them, as he obviously is not going to roll with guys like that. He tries to fend them off, but as he starts to get overwhelmed, a military vehicle pulls up. This makes everyone a bit scared, and that's when Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene step out. Abraham and Rosita aim guns at everyone, and the Claimers start to fight against them. However, they're able to easily kill them before Morgan gets a chance to end it without death. Abraham mentions how Morgan's skills are very impressive, and he thinks that they could use a good fighter like him to help their mission. Morgan doesn't want to at first, but after finding out that it could lead to a cure, and seeing that he has made literally no progress on finding Rick, he decides to join up with them. They all plan to go to Washington, D.C. to find the cure, but Morgan just wants to find his friend. Some time passes as they get closer to D.C., with Eugene messing with their car and causing them to look for other ones. At some point, Morgan gets sick of it and chooses to leave to find Rick alone, which causes Abraham to get mad. The two get into an argument where Eugene finally reveals that he's not a scientist. Abraham then beats Eugene up, causing Morgan to step in and hit Abraham with his staff. This makes him stop and just go to his knees in silence like he did in the show. Rosita and Morgan would be trying to make sure Eugene is alright, with his face now bleeding quite a bit. Morgan realizes that he can't leave them like this, so he and Rosita eventually get Abraham to stop sulking, and they take him and Eugene back to avoid the herd. Let's now jump back to our main group at Alexandria. After we've caught up to the original timeline, we'd see the group find that massive herd from the original story, and try to deal with it. There would be some role switches, but I feel like most of the stuff would happen similarly. Like Sasha and Abraham's roles get replaced by Beth, since you only need one person to drive a car, and Rick is replaced by Carol. These wouldn't be exact swaps, but I feel like the gist is more or less the same. At some point, they would be attacked by the wolves, and it would be very difficult to counter since Carol is off doing the herd plan. Luckily, they had been training the people of Alexandria for a few months, so we'd probably see less casualties here. Another thing is that Morgan, Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene arrive during this time. The first three quickly begin fighting the wolves, with Morgan easily handling many of them while Abraham and Rosita gun some of them down. By the end, the remaining wolves are either killed or forced away, and the tower falls over. This is a major breach in the walls, causing a ton of walkers to flood in and beginning the No Way Out storyline. So the original groups from canon were Tara, Rosita, and Eugene in the garage, Morgan, Denise, and Carol with Owen, who's one of the wolves, and then Rick, Michonne, Gabriel, Carl, Judith, Deanna, and the Andersons in a house. But this time, Morgan is just now joining the group. Morgan and Abraham's group gets split up due to walkers, with Eugene and Morgan going into the house Denise was in. Owen goes inside and steals Denise, but Morgan can't really do anything about it due to the walkers. Meanwhile, Abraham and Rosita go into the Andersons' home. Deanna had still been bitten here, so she's gonna be fading as she inspires Michonne. Abraham suggests that they escape as soon as possible due to the walkers trying to get in, but that's easier said than done. Carl brings up the walker guts idea, as Glenn would have probably mentioned doing it at some point. so they reluctantly do this idea, which works in getting them out. The difference here is that Ron and Carl don't really have a rivalry since Carol was the one who killed his father. Before, it was Rick, Carl's father, so it made sense why Ron would dislike him. But here, not so much. Sadly, I would still see Sam having the panic attack that he did in canon due to Carol's influence on him. So Sam would be eaten by walkers, and Jesse wouldn't let go of him, so I think we'd have the scene of Carl cutting her arm to free himself. Ron would obviously be broken at seeing his mother and brother die, and would try to shoot Carol for killing his father, but luckily Michonne is able to stab him, but this sends the bullet toward Carl. So Carl is still shot in the eye, and Carol picks him up as the rest of them fight their way to safety. They get him into the infirmary, and Owen takes Denise there so she can save Carl. But since Carol is in Rick's place, she can't snipe Owen, so this means that he actually survives and they both get into the infirmary. The gang is furious upon seeing one of the wolves, but Denise says not to kill him and that he's been bitten. They need to cut his arm off and they don't have time to debate it. So Michonne cuts off his arm and the others try to get him patched up while Denise works on Carl. Once they've got Owen in a stable enough position, they get tired of not doing anything against the walkers, and so some of them, like Michonne and Carol, go out and just kill a ton of them. And this results in everyone joining in, and they eventually finish all of them off. Elsewhere, Daryl and Beth get found by the motorcycle saviors and take their weapons. When they mention Negan, Beth asks who that is, and the leader threatens to kill her, but as he's about to, Daryl blows them all up with a rocket launcher. The two then return to Alexandria and save everyone, which is a good moment for Beth. Also, I do still think that Nicholas would have died by this point in a similar fashion to his original death, so we still get the Glenn fake death here. Aiden will still be alive and would be a changed man now, so this also means that Spencer doesn't go crazy and start plotting against everyone since his brother is still alive. Once it's all over, Morgan, Abraham, Eugene, and Rosita introduce themselves, and Morgan asks any of them if they ever met a man named Rick Grimes. Of course, to the original group, this name is very familiar, but it's deep in their mind. They tell Morgan that he was killed by his best friend about a year ago. This breaks Morgan's heart, as he quickly begins to regret not leaving when he had the chance. Maybe if he had, Dwayne and Rick would still be alive. But he decides to stick around and help the group Rick was part of in order to honor him. Luckily for him, Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene also decide to stay. Following Owen's arm removal, he is put into a cell to protect everyone, since he was just trying to kill all of them a day prior. Denise and Morgan both vouch for him, but most people want him dead, especially Aiden, whose mother is now dead due to the wolves' attack on Alexandria. But I think that with enough good people around, they'd prevent anyone from killing Owen, and he'd instead be locked up for a while. Anyway, now that the canon events are starting to line up, I'm sure you guys are wondering how Shane and Woodbury are doing. If I'm being honest, we'd probably see a war break out between Woodbury and the militia. It might be started by Shane, or it might not be. I'll leave that part up to your guys' own interpretation, as I could totally see it going either way. But the bottom line is that there would be a war, which would be very big. Woodbury is a huge town, but doesn't have as much artillery compared to the militia, which literally has a tank. So I think there would be a ton of losses on both sides, which is perfect for me. I'd see Pete and Mitch Dolgan both dying, as well as their militia. The only people who survive on that side are Tara and Megan, who weren't involved in the battle. As for the state of Woodbury, the buildings would be mostly destroyed with the walkers overrunning the area. So I think the survivors would be Shane, Milton, Lizzie, and Mika. Her father, Martinez, Dr. S, and everyone else would be killed in the attack or by walkers. And so the remaining four escape the ruins, with Shane dragging the crying Lizzie and Mika, and Milton following. They later run into Tara and Megan, who they are unaware were part of the militia as they weren't involved in the fight. So Shane allows them to join their little group. The 6 people would split into pairs when going out. We'd see Lizzie stay with Milton, while Tara and Megan stick together, and Shane takes Mika in order to train her to make her stronger. But one day, Lizzie stabs Milton in his sleep and ties him up so that when he turns, he won't get free. Shane and Mika return and see Lizzie with a zombified Milton, and she's going on about how she could let Mika turn next. Shane is immediately furious by this and just blown away at the fact that this could happen. He knew this girl was weird, but this is a new level. But even so, Shane speaks calmly and convinces Lizzie to come with him to the fields. After leading her away, he shoots and kills her, knowing that it's what had to be done. Mika cries when she sees him return without Lizzie, but Shane assures her that she was a danger to everyone, and he couldn't let her kill anyone else because of her ideas. He wasn't going to let her hold Mika back. Mika cries and nods her head, and Shane hugs her to comfort her. He wonders why Megan and Tara aren't back yet, and so he keeps watch throughout the night while Mika sleeps. Now I'm sure you're also wondering why those two haven't returned, so I'll answer that now. You see, Tara and Megan stumbled upon a house that was stocked up with lots of food. As Tara went outside to deal with some walkers later that night, she came back in, unable to find Megan. Tara yelled out her name as she frantically looked in every room before running outside and seeing a car with a cross. That's right, Megan has been taken by the people of Grady Memorial Hospital. This actually works with the timeline, as currently with Shane, we're only about a month or two off from season 4, so it makes sense that the hospital group would still be baiting people. Tara tries chasing after the car, but is quickly outpaced and left panting. With no other option, she heads back to the house Shane and the others are at. The next day, when she finds them, she quickly tells them that Megan has been kidnapped. Shane replies with his own story. Lizzie killed Milton, and he killed Lizzie to prevent her from killing again. He asks if she saw where the car was headed, and she says yes. The three then go back to the house Tara was at and stocking up on supplies. After that, they head the way the car was going, but that short path can only lead them so far, as they've got no idea where the people who took Megan could have went. But as the trail runs dry, Shane hears a few nearby walkers. As he approaches them, he sees a man hiding from them. Shane decides to go take the walkers down, with Tara aiding him. They do so, and they save the guy who had been hiding. Shane asks his name, and he says that he's Bob Stookie. Tara asks if he's seen a car go by at any point recently, and he replies with a yes. He saw the direction it was going in. So they ask if he can take them to it, as they're looking for Tara's niece. Bob agrees, and so they follow him until his knowledge of their path runs out. But by that point, they've got a decent idea of where they went. Shane realizes that they're going to be heading back to Atlanta in order to find the location of the people who took Megan. In the time where Megan is at the hospital, the people there would take a decent care of her since she is a little girl. After a few days or maybe even weeks of looking, Shane's group finds the hospital and decides that he wants to take it over. Shane knows it could end up being the perfect place for them to live, so if they can get Megan back and take the hospital, it would be great. So Shane, Bob, and Tara all form a similar plan to that of Rick's. They enact it quite similarly as well, with Shane killing everyone that stands in his way. As for Tara and Bob, they're just with Shane to make sure he doesn't die, but they're not trying to hurt anybody. However, it is kind of drummed up by Shane, the fact that they would kidnap a little girl, so if they have to hurt someone, they will, but they're gonna mostly avoid it. Eventually, Shane makes it up to where Dawn is. There, they have an argument, and this leads to Shane gunning Dawn down in front of all the residents before starting a speech. From what he heard, she was corrupt. Taking little girls and refusing to give them back is not what a leader does. He used to be an officer just like her, and he knows how to handle these things. The group at the hospital was extremely reluctant at first, but I think his argument would be good enough to convince them, especially when they bring up stories like Noah's, where his father was left behind, or the officers having to kidnap others under the rule of Dawn. So having another officer come in and steer them in the right direction would be really good. Now that we've caught up with Shane's group, we must return to our main squad at Alexandria. Daryl and Aaron would likely meet Jesus while going on a run to find people, since they're still doing that. This would happen in a similar fashion to how it does in the show, only here, Aaron is replacing Rick. They learn about Hilltop from Jesus and decide to make a trade with them. But first, they must take out the Savior's base, so they're gonna do that now. I don't see a lot really changing here other than a few people being swapped around. Heath goes off on his own this time since Tara isn't part of the group. Because of this, he'd probably be the one to find Oceanside and have that little subplot. Denise would still be killed by Dwight, with Rosita having to break the news to Owen. He's furious that the one person who made him really feel wanted is now gone. Past that, the squad still ends up being found by the Saviors while trying to take Maggie to the hilltop. And I know that we kind of just rushed through the second half of season 6, but I really don't want to get bogged down by the unimportant stuff. So I only pointed out the main changes in order to keep our plot moving forward. So, once they get caught by Negan, they are all forced to their knees and surrounded by the Saviors. But this time, they're missing Rick. Carol and Morgan are still off together and get found by the Kingdom. I don't see the people Negan kills changing too much, so the deaths of both Abraham and Glenn remain the same. I'm not going to leave you guys on a cliffhanger like the actual show does. Negan then takes Daryl to the sanctuary and leaves everyone else to go back to Alexandria and work for him. Without Rick to ground everyone into the reality that they stand no chance, I would see Michonne fighting back a lot sooner. This also prompts Rosita to fire at Negan with the bullet Eugene made. This would lead to the deaths of both Spencer and Olivia as it did in canon, and Eugene is taken to the sanctuary. Upon the deaths of Olivia and Spencer at the hand of the Saviors, the gang rises up to fight together against Negan. Episode 9 of Season 7 is the first real change from this point. When the gang is trying to defuse the bomb on the road, Rick being gone is going to prove detrimental. The group manages to get all the bombs much quicker, but Rick's plan to kill the herd would never even be thought of. Jesus and Tara both didn't understand the plan when it was brought up, and even Michonne was scared about it, so clearly none of them had or even liked the idea, and I doubt they would here. So this means that the herd wouldn't be killed and would just continue roaming the streets toward the communities. When the group gets taken by Jadis and her people, Jadis would choose Michonne to fight Winslow. This is because I think Michonne fits the bill for the leader of the group, or at least as close as it can get without Rick. And because Michonne is very quick on her feet, I do think she will be able to kill Winslow, but probably not as well as Rick did. She might struggle a bit more. She also definitely doesn't have as much charisma as Rick, especially not to Jadis. So I do think the argument would be a 50-50 split of the Savior's stuff after they win. After this, Michonne would probably end up going on a trip with Carl or someone else rather than Rick. So without Rick being there to push Michonne to keep searching, they would not end up finding the guns they need. Or at least they might find them and then come back with the whole group to get the stuff. But that would take much longer. Also, Heath would tell the group about Oceanside this time instead of Tara, since he's the one who went there. Rosita wouldn't go to kill Negan because of the massive herd leading from the Savior's base, so at some point, the herd would go off and hit Alexandria. Thankfully, it wouldn't be as large due to the Saviors traveling on those roads and killing some. The Saviors would have needed to clear some out and divert others, so by the time it hits Alexandria, it might be about 2/3 of its original size. That said, given from what we saw, it's still massive. So when they press against the walls, the group is forced to try and take it out. This expends the majority of the guns and ammo the group had just found, meaning that the season finale is going to be pretty bad. Of course, this is combined with the fact that Sasha catching Negan off guard wouldn't happen because she is still long dead. But maybe there's still hope, as I think we'd see an unlikely team-up occur here. We don't have Sasha and Rosita's little pact, but I think there is someone Rosita knows has enough hatred for the Saviors and reckless thinking to get the job done. And that's Owen. She knows what Denise meant to him, so seeing him fired up about killing Dwight makes her feel as though he'd be far more useful to her than staying locked up. And sure, Owen is missing an arm, but he has also helped raid Alexandria, so he has experience. So the two form a pact to get into the sanctuary and kill Negan, and hopefully Dwight too. As Rosita sneaks Owen out of Alexandria with some gear, someone catches a glimpse of the two escaping. Aiden. And so when the two head out, Aiden trails them until he sees them struggling with walkers. It's been a while since Owen has been outside, and he's never fought with one arm before, so he's having some trouble. Luckily, Aiden comes to their rescue, but angrily asks why Rosita is letting this guy out. She replies that they're done waiting for others to act. They're going after Negan now. Aiden refuses to let the man who led to the death of his mother go free, so he says that he wants to join them. Rosita asks if he's got some screws loose, as they are risking their lives for this, but Aiden recognizes that risk. Negan killed his brother Spencer. If she's gonna try and kill this guy, she's gonna need more help than a dude with one arm. Owen denies this request, but Aiden isn't just gonna let them go off. If they don't allow him to join them, he's just gonna go rat them out. They're not far enough away to avoid that. Rosita finally gives in, and Aiden is glad to be part of this alliance. They all plan to sneak in and take Negan out, as it's the kind of job Owen and Rosita favor more. Plus, without Glenn, Aiden is retreating to his more reckless strategies. The night arrives, and Eugene steps outside with a guard to talk about securing the sanctuary. As they talk, the dude is shot in the head by Aiden, with Owen slicing the walker at the fence. Rosita runs to the fence and begins cutting it, as she tells Eugene that they're breaking him out. However, he refuses, saying that they should leave before more people show up. Eugene then runs inside, and Rosita finishes cutting the fence. The three enter the compound, and Rosita takes the guy's pistol, leaving Spencer with her rifle, and Owen with a knife. The three head inside, clearing out all the saviors that run up on them, but during that scuffle, Owen gets shot in the leg, putting him to the ground. Aiden tells Rosita to leave him, but she tries to help him up, so Aiden treads onward to find Negan. Owen asks Rosita to leave him behind so that she can finish their mission. She asks if he's serious, and he nods. He'll only slow them down. And so, Rosita picks up one of the dead savior's guns and hands it to Owen as they share a look before she goes off to catch up with Aiden. As she runs, she hears yelling and gunshots behind her but refuses to look back, running forward. After she runs for a bit, she sees Aiden on the ground as whistles approach from all angles. Rosita is now surrounded by saviors and knocked unconscious. She wakes up in a dark room as the door opens to a man. He approaches her trying to feel her up, but she fights back. As the man continues to advance, Negan enters the room, scolding him for what he was about to do, before putting a knife through his neck. After that, he begins buttering Rosita up, but this fails as Rosita refuses to give in. Negan leaves the knife for her to hopefully put through the man's brain before he turns and save herself. He closes the door, saying, "Now for the other," before heading to another similar room. He opens the door and talks to Aiden, asking if they've met before. Aiden says yes, and that Negan killed his brother, Spencer. The big man is surprised to hear about this, and even impressed that he actually took some action. He's not like his brother at all. Negan can tell that trying to convince Rosita is going to be a waste of time, but this guy just might break. He listens to what Aiden has to say, and then reminds him that he has no one left with those guys now. Negan can tell that he's got some repressed feelings of being unseen, unwanted, and other things, and with time, he could maybe be seen. And to him, a guy like Aiden is definitely wanted. Negan then leaves, giving him some time to think. He comes back to convince him some more, and Aiden seems to be on board. The only other options are death and imprisonment, and he's not too fond of those. Negan is happy to see this progress, and tells him that he'll be up there in no time. His first opportunity will be presented to him very soon. It'll be hard, but Negan is certain that Aiden will make the right decision. At some point, Eugene approaches Rosita with a peace offering, hoping she'll join up with the Saviors like he did. But his intuition tells him she won't. Rosita tells Eugene that he's a traitor and that she knows he won't do anything about this. But he could at least give her the ability to. If he could smuggle her some kind of weapon, that would be all she needs to take Negan out. Eugene at first refuses, stating that if he did that, he would be blamed instantly. He can't risk jeopardizing his place here, as it's the only thing that's keeping him alive. However, Eugene later returns to her room, slipping a tiny knife under the door, and telling her that if she gets caught, she always had it. She just hid it really well during their searches. And so the following day, Negan takes Rosita and Aiden with him in order to pay the group at Alexandria a visit. The two get their hands tied up, and Negan heads out with his saviors. The night prior, Dwight had pulled up to Alexandria, telling him about his plan to attack. Dwight offers to help cut them off so that the rest of the group can better prepare, and Daryl reluctantly lets him live. Negan and the Saviors eventually do arrive at the gates, and our group is dreading the oncoming battle. They have very few guns, and they're missing one of their best fighters, Rosita. The squad is banking on their alliance with Jadis's group right now, which might not be the best idea. After Negan arrives, he has Simon pull Rosita and Aiden out of a truck, putting them on their knees. Michonne stands at the front gate in Rick's place, since she's taken up the leadership role. Negan tells him that his original plan was to kill 3 people to punish them. However, after he found these 2 sneaking through his base, gunning people down, he got a new idea. The big man then looks at Simon, telling him to cut Aiden's binds, and Simon does so with a somewhat questioning face. Aiden stands, and Negan explains to the group that Aiden here isn't like his brother. He's willing to take some action. He's just like Rosita and the other guy that broke into his base. But the thing that separates him from the others is that he has a chance to survive, as long as he makes the right choice here. Negan then hands Lucille over to Aiden. He stands there looking up at Negan confused, but the big man assures him that he's being serious. Aiden reluctantly takes the bat in hand, and Negan smiles. We've heard from the Croat in Dead City that Negan has handed over his prized weapon before, so I think it's likely he would here too. It's a pretty similar situation. Negan turns back to the group, telling them that instead of taking out 3 of their people, he's just gonna have Aiden here kill Rosita. But if he can't do it, he'll have to stick to the original plan, including these 2 and 1 more. Aiden walks behind Rosita, holding Lucille with uncertainty. Negan looks over to him and Aiden nods, lifting the bat up to hit Rosita. But just as he's about to strike, Rosita turns and stabs Aiden in the leg, causing him to stagger. She then slams the back of her head against him until he stumbles back. This incident leaves an opening for Carl to gun down some of the treacherous junkyard group, prompting the shootout to begin. Rosita rolls away in a similar fashion to Michonne in Season 4, as Aiden looks down at his leg to see a tiny knife given to Rosita by Eugene. He pulls it out, standing up and running for cover. Negan yells at Simon, asking how Rosita got a knife, and he says that their guys must not have searched her well enough. The shootout commences, but the Saviors turn the tide pretty quickly as there's just not enough weaponry left after that massive attack on Alexandria. But remember that Negan is trying to kill as few people as possible so that he can just stick to his original plan of killing 1 to terrify the many. So the deaths here would probably just be the randos instead of like actual named characters. Negan gets Michonne and Carl on the ground, telling them a similar speech to what he told Rick canonically. He brings Aiden over, telling them that there's been a change of plans and that he needs to kill Carl now.
Carl accepts this, thinking that Aiden will probably do it, but Aiden turns to Negan saying that he can't. He won't just kill this kid. And Negan says that he understands, taking the bat. Negan replies that it's such a shame before swinging Lucille at Aiden. But before he could land it, a tiger jumps onto another savior nearby, taking Negan by surprise. Aiden then shoves him away as he tells Carl and Michonne to get out of there. At the same time, King Ezekiel leads soldiers from the kingdom, and Maggie leads some from the hilltop to push the saviors out of Alexandria. Because of the lesser weaponry of Alexandria, as I said before, I still think more people would die, but like I said, they'd be randoms. We'll also say that when Simon is shooting at people, he ends up shooting at Aiden, causing him to bleed out. The savior then smirks as he then departs with the others, as he knew keeping people from their side alive was pointless in the end. The saviors escape the battle, regrouping and discussing what comes next. At the same time, Michonne, Maggie, and Ezekiel are united to end the saviors together. But with that, Season 7 is done. Let's go on to Season 8. Since Rick isn't here, Carl would either encounter Sadik alone or with someone else like Enid, so I do think that means Sadik joins the group much sooner, as Rick isn't going to scare him off. From here, I think most of the war at the beginning of the season will go about the same. Daryl keeps the bomb since he doesn't have Rick to fight for them. It also didn't really seem like the group wanted to recruit the scavengers after they had betrayed them, so because of that fact, nothing like that ever happens. With the extra support of Daryl's bomb, breaking the sanctuary down would be an easier task. For the mid-season finale, most of this will happen the same. The main difference is that Carl survives because he doesn't have to help Sadik kill walkers. After that, Rick running Negan off the road wouldn't occur, so Negan will stay in power of the saviors. This also means the hilltop attack will be radically different. Negan's plan seemed like it was going to lead to a few deaths, but not a lot. He wanted to hit some people with the walker guts to make them turn and scare the people away from fighting. So this will still happen, leading to Tobin and a few others turning and trying to attack the group. But the outbreak wouldn't be as big. Simon would eventually still get busted by Negan for his treachery, although the treachery would be more underground, and the two would fight, with Negan killing him in the end. So from there, the final battle in the finale would go the same for the most part. Oh yeah, the Junkyard group is never fully wiped out because Simon never takes power. One key difference in the final battle would be that Negan would be battling Michonne at the end instead of Rick. The two go at it, but I think Negan would get the advantage over her, so he tries to kill her, but is shot in the back of the head by Maggie. From there, I think they would spare the saviors since they had given up. But Maggie makes it known that she doesn't want to see any of them again, and same with the Junkyard group. So Season 8 finishes with some major changes. Carl is still alive, Beth is still alive, Negan is dead, and the saviors are pretty much on their own at the sanctuary. Although I do think with Carl rising up as he grows older, he would convince Michonne and the people of Alexandria to let the saviors help. He wants a world where all of them work together so they can't leave people to die, even if the Hilltop wants them to. Now, after all of that, let's finally get back to Shane. So the people of the Grady Memorial Hospital are all confirmed to have died. There is no context given to how, when, or why. All we know is that they are dead eventually. So I'm gonna say that this happened somewhere between the last time we saw Shane and Season 9's start. We had Tara, Shane, Bob, Noah, Mika, and Megan at the hospital, so just to make things simple, I'll say that what killed them was like a walker herd of something. It's not really that important if you think it was something else, I'm just using the walkers as a way to show who dies here. So if you think they died from other causes, just think about that happening instead. As the group tries to escape the hospital after it is starting to get overrun, many people would die. All the characters at the hospital that die originally still do here, with Shane, Tara, Mika, Megan, Bob, and Noah fighting their way out. They eventually manage to do so, barely surviving and escaping. After that, they decide to get out of Georgia and head north. We'll catch back up with them later, but first, it's important to detail the events of early Season 9. We've got a pretty major change here, and that is the fact that Rick is dead. Him being there and disappearing in this season is what led to lots of things changing, but now he's not here to begin with. So let's run off the obvious points. For example, RJ is never born. He's Rick and Michonne's kid, and if there's no Rick Jr. Another change is that Carl is still alive along with Beth as well. Beth would probably serve as Maggie's second in command at Hilltop, sort of advising her on what to do, and with the help of Carl and Beth, Maggie would reluctantly agree to give the necessary supplies to the sanctuary so that they could help build the bridge. But after that, they're on their own. Unfortunately, it all still goes south and Aaron loses his arm. The main difference is that there's no Negan to fight over, so Daryl and Maggie would just be putting their all into stopping the herd. And with all the groups together, maybe even getting the Junkyard group involved a little bit, they'd be able to build the bridge and stop the walkers without any real casualty. Oh yeah, and the question might come up that if the Junkyard group is alive, would Jadis even try? and communicate with the CRM, and I do still think she would, just because they have like a bigger purpose than anything she lives to do. So she'd need someone to take. And since Heath is around and he had the whole Oceanside plot instead of Tara, I'll say Jadis takes him to the CRM while he was on his way back to Oceanside. Jadis caused his disappearance originally, so, I mean, she needs to take somebody and there's no Rick. And we need to get rid of Heath because, like, honestly, what is he gonna do in these seasons? Daryl stays at Alexandria during the time skip since he has no reason to go into the forest looking for Rick. The communities would all stay in contact with each other, leading to the fair happening annually and not being an issue. The episode where Michonne's friend shows up and takes Judith would still occur, but Daryl and Carl would help Michonne deal with the kids who try to kill her. And she wouldn't be pregnant, so it'd be easier to keep herself safe. Because Daryl isn't in the forest, he would never meet Leah or Dog, so that may make things a little different later on. But now that we've covered all of the stuff building up to the bulk of Season 9, let's jump back over to Shane and his group. So because they are traveling north, which is in the direction of our main group, I'm going to say that they would eventually end up in the forest that Daryl was in canonically. This means that they would meet Leah as well as Dog. Leah is at first unwilling to work with them, but Shane puts her in her place. There are way more of them than they are of her, so she really doesn't get a choice here. Shane asks if she has a group, but she refuses to answer. He tells her that he used to be a cop and he's just trying to get a safe place for his group so that they can relax. They've got a guy with a messed up leg, and he's been walking with them, trying to find a new home for years. This is obviously referring to Noah. And they've got 2 young girls as well. Leah, upon realizing that they aren't horrible people, finally agrees to let them stay, although there are restrictions due to just how many there are. Shane doesn't really trust that, but he's forced to compromise. They stay the night and begin bonding with Leah over many months. But due to just how many of them there are, the need for supplies would be great, and just living in the forest cabin isn't the best call. So they move around quite a bit, and after some time, Leah and Shane get together. I can just see their similar personalities clashing and leading to a really strong bond. Many months after they met, nearly a year, Shane and Leah go out to look for water, food, and other essentials, but they get overrun by walkers, and Shane is forced to leave her behind. He makes it back to the group without her, and they tread onward, with Shane trying his hardest to search in case Leah survived. But he finds no signs of her body or anything. Some more time passes, maybe another year or so, and one night, the group is sleeping in their camp. Shane hears a noise and wakes everyone up. He tells them to get ready for a fight, and they all prepare. From the shadows steps the Reapers, with Pope leading them. He smiles and applauds them for how they were ready to defend themselves at a moment's notice. Shane asks who he is and what he wants while holding a weapon, and Pope replies that he just came across them. He hasn't decided what he wants with them just yet. One of the Reapers steps out in front and takes off the mask. Shane's eyes start to widen. It's Leah. He puts the weapon down and tries to hug her, but she counters him and puts him on the ground. Shane quickly becomes confused, but Leah tells him not to mess this up. She looks up at Pope and says that she knows these people, and she's seen just how capable some of them are. They'd be fine additions to the Reapers. Pope says that he'll be the judge of that and begins looking through their ranks. 2 little girls, 3 men, one of them appearing to have some kind of impairment, and a woman. That's kind of slim pickings. But he'll take it as long as they can prove their worth. Shane is quick to rebut, not wanting to be walked over by this guy, but Leah warns him with a physical gesture not to. If they can pass some trials, joining the Reapers could be extremely useful for them to finally get the place that they've always wanted. Shane reluctantly goes against his better judgment and agrees to participate in these tests from Pope, and the man smiles and tells his men to head out before taking them back home. After the events that took place during the 6-year time skip, which don't differ too much, Michonne closes up Alexandria's gates to outsiders. Carl is not too fond of this for obvious reasons and has lots of disagreements with her about it. She really isn't a big sister/motherly role to him here and is instead more like an older friend. She doesn't even know who Rick Grimes is outside of him being mentioned. This also makes Carl more of the caretaker to his little sister Judith, although Daryl would also play a big role in her life since he's staying. With no Rick to go after, Daryl has no reason to go out in the woods all the time, so he pretty much just stays in Alexandria or whatever community needs him most at the time. We do have to answer whether or not Maggie would leave with Georgie since Negan isn't around and she doesn't feel any regret for what happened to Rick. But we'll say that she still wants to build the communities with Georgie, and she thinks it'd be good for Herschel to get out and experience things with her instead of just staying at Hilltop all the time, especially when Michonne starts closing up Alexandria. And due to Beth still being alive, she knows things at Hilltop will be in great hands thanks to her. so maybe she leaves a little bit later, but I think she still does. The Alexandria group outside the walls when Judith saves Magna's group would probably have Carl in it instead of Laura since, well, I mean, yeah, of course it would. Carl would also replace the random dude on the council. When Magna is creeping up on Michonne's house with a weapon, she'd have no reason to stop her attempt since RJ doesn't exist to humanize Michonne. So she slowly starts opening the door, only to hear a faint whisper, "Hey." Magna turns around quickly, aiming the knife at Carl, who has his hands up. He warns her that attacking Michonne won't look good for them, and for her to trust him when he says that it won't go well for her either. Michonne is very capable in a fight. Magna drops the blade, asking why he followed her, and Carl tells her that he was coming to talk to Michonne into compromising more for her group. He just saw her sneaking around and jeopardizing that, so he wanted to stop her before she did anything rash. Magna accepts this reluctantly and says that she'll talk to her, apologize for what happened. He doesn't have to fight their battles. Carl agrees to this, walking away. Magna and Michonne then have the same conversation they did canonically, which is much better than the two fighting. Michonne wouldn't really have that same epiphany she had from talking to Judith, but I think Carl being a strong voice on the council might sway her a little bit. But remember that Carl and Michonne don't have the same bond they do in canon, and also remember just how much it took to fully convince Michonne. There was the thoughts of Rick, which don't exist, the convo with Judith, which doesn't happen, and RJ reminding her of her humanity, and RJ doesn't exist, so yeah. So I think Gabriel and Sadik would be leading Magna's group out of Alexandria, only for Carl to show up on a horse and say that there's been a change of plans. He's taking them to a community kinda like this one, Hilltop. Sadik says that Michonne's not gonna like this, but Gabriel, who was already helping with something Michonne doesn't like, aka the whole radio signal plan, defends it. He tells Sadik to go with them in order to keep an eye on Yumiko and her injury, and that he'll hold things down here if there's any suspicion. Magna's group thanks Carl and Judith for their help, and Carl, Sadik, and DJ leave with them. Since Carl is already going against Michonne's decision, there'd be a lot less skepticism and conflict on the way. However, Michonne would worry once Carl and the others aren't back that night, and she starts preparing a search team. This forces Gabriel to come clean as he doesn't want Michonne to be freaking out. He tells her that they're being taken to Hilltop by Carl, and she gets upset at him for it. But just to be safe, she goes to someone she knows can track them down quickly, Daryl. She asks him to go after Carl and the others and make sure that they make it back safely, only for Daryl to remark that he knows Carl can handle himself, especially in a group that big. Michonne simply gives him a look, and they both remember what happened long ago when they got the X's branded on their backs. He then says that he'll go get ready, and she thanks him. In the morning, Carl quickly gives Magna's group their weapons when the walkers attack. They're able to wipe them out easier due to this, and eventually arrive at Hilltop after meeting the messengers for Rosita being found injured. Daryl and Henry would probably arrive at Hilltop much sooner since they don't stop by Daryl's. Jesus and Aaron also don't go out alone to find Eugene since Daryl isn't there yet. This means that they take longer to leave the circling herd alone, as Daryl was the one who told them a storm was coming. Gabriel and Michonne hear from the messengers about Rosita, and that freaks them out quite a bit. Past that, Carl arrives at Hilltop, where he's greeted by Beth, who is currently running things in place of her older sister Maggie. Jesus is her advisor, as he doesn't really want to accept that status as leader, and I think Beth would be more willing to fit Magna's shoes than Tara. So we kind of see a role reversal where Jesus is Tara and Tara is Beth. Yeah, sure. Since there's no bad blood between anyone here, I don't think Carl, Sadik, or DJ would be forced to give up their weapons. But Magna's group probably would since they're new. Beth reveals the news of Eugene being missing, and Aaron and Jesus going out to find him. Carl would also see Enid, and the two would have a somewhat awkward reunion, where Enid is now with Alden. I think Carl and Enid would have stayed together, but Enid would leave once Michonne closed up the walls, as she wanted to live somewhere that she felt was doing things right. She knows that's what Carl wants too, but he has too much attachment to the people in Alexandria to give up. That's why he stayed behind. Beth tells Magna's group that if they want to stay, they'll have to earn their keep, and Sadik and Carl also reunite with Carol here, which is really neat. Carol will talk to him about Alexandria, Judith, and that she thinks he'd really like Henry. He's at Hilltop to learn from a blacksmith in order to fix his home, the Kingdom. Carl obviously feels a similar weight on his shoulders to fix Alexandria, so he agrees that he probably would like him. Anyway, without Daryl's clock distraction, Jesus and Aaron would be flabbergasted as the herd seems to follow them, despite never seeing them, and it's growing at a rapid rate. They also wouldn't find Eugene until a bit later, since they didn't have Daryl or Dog to help track him down. Speaking of Daryl, he'd arrive at Hilltop on his motorcycle, saying that he was there to make sure Carl and the others got here. Michonne told him to. Carl figured she'd find out what was up eventually, but Daryl then tells him that he talked to the messengers too. Soon after, Rosita wakes up, saying that she knows where Eugene is. This prompts Carl and Daryl to head out in order to find him, Aaron, and Jesus. Once Aaron and Jesus do find Eugene, they'd get chased by the herd, forcing Jesus to come up with a last-minute plan to lead the herd away while Aaron gets the injured Eugene to the horses. Aaron doesn't like the plan, but Jesus knows it's the only way. However, Jesus is just completely unable to follow through with this, as even Daryl using firecrackers and dogs barking wasn't able to lead the herd away, so Jesus would not have any luck here on his own. This leaves Aaron and Eugene alone against tons of walkers, forcing them to fight back with all they've got. They're able to kill a bunch of them, mainly Aaron, but luckily they get found by Daryl and Carl, as well as Magna and Yumiko. The four help Eugene get past the gate, forcing Aaron to fight off the walkers alone. But based on how Aaron does against Jesus in their little scuffle, he's comparable to him, but probably a little less skilled / strong, if we're being honest. And Jesus got killed by a Whisperer, so even if Aaron was just as good, he'd be killed in his place. Jesus then arrives, helping them take down the other Whisperers and mourning the loss of Aaron. They find the masks and take them along with Aaron's body. And honestly, I'm probably being a bit too nice considering just how much of a disadvantage Aaron, Jesus, and Eugene were. It's entirely possible that without Aaron even making a dent in the herd, and with them going slower, that the herd would have likely caught up to them way sooner, resulting in someone else being bitten on top of Aaron's death. But like I said, I'm going to be a little bit charitable, and just be glad nothing else happened. When they find more walkers and Whisperers on the bridge, Jesus opts to take down the one Michonne killed, but he just outskills him and knocks him out, slamming him against the wall. They then hold Lydia at crossbow point and take both of them back with them. Beth and Carl interrogate Lydia along with Daryl. Sadik and Rosita leave with DJ and Eugene to take Aaron's body to Alexandria and inform them of what's going on. Carl and Daryl stay at Hilltop in order to help out with the situation though. I think Carl would leave with Marco, Magna, and the others after telling Enid he would help find Alden. Daryl lets Henry out of jail after he talks too much to Lydia. They have the same confrontation they did in canon, but in between, Beth would tell Daryl that Carol brought Henry here. This makes Daryl feel an obligation to the kid, so we're pretty much back at where we were in canon. Back at Hilltop, we'd see Jesus lamenting to Beth about what happened. Aaron told him that he thinks he'd make a great leader, but Jesus denied it. And then he took charge by telling Aaron and Eugene to run while he distracted the herd. And he completely failed, leading to Aaron's death. As if Jesus went with them, he would have died instead. Jesus now feels entirely certain that he wouldn't make a good leader since he got Aaron killed. At Alexandria, Rosita and the others would return, and Aaron's daughter Gracie would step out to see her father return, only to find his body strapped to a horse. Michonne quickly comforts her, trying to shield her from looking, and asks someone to take her home before receiving all the news of what just transpired. Magna and the others return when the Whisperers arrive outside of Hilltop following Connie, who was missing before. Alpha offers Luke and Alden in return for Lydia and their extra guy, but they find Lydia gone along with Henry. Everyone begins a search, but without Dog, it'd be a lot harder for Daryl to locate them. But he eventually does, and Enid talks him into letting Lydia go. The trade is made, and the Whisperers leave Hilltop. Henry decides to go after Lydia, but Daryl and Connie head after him, with Carl also wanting to go after hearing about and seeing Henry and feeling all the similarities between them. After all, Henry basically just takes Carl's plot from the comic version of this arc, so they're more closely linked than either of them knows. Once again going back to Alexandria, Michonne would likely take Gracie in due to Aaron's death, but since there's no conversation with Judith or Negan, and someone from Alexandria died because they didn't follow her rules, she wouldn't be allowing a revote for the fair. Daryl and Connie lead a herd into the Whisperer camp, while Carl charges in to grab Henry and Lydia. Daryl would be upset at Carl and Henry for taking Lydia, but they would just move past it in order to keep ahead of the Whisperers. This leads them to the choke point where they're able to fight off Beta and his little squad. With Carl there, he's able to prevent Henry from being injured. Because of that, he tells Connie to escape with Henry and Lydia, while he makes sure Daryl is good. They go off with some hesitation, allowing Carl to come in and land the final blow on Beta, sending him into the pit. He and Daryl then dip. Just as a little side note, Jesus would be present with the guys fighting the walkers instead of Tara. Anyway, while Henry isn't hurt, I do think Carl would opt to go to Alexandria for a few reasons. 1, everyone needs to be fully aware of what they're dealing with. 2, so we can try and convince Michonne to accept the fair invitation. And 3, because he wants to see Judith and try to comfort Gracie. Carl would probably have a similar conversation with Judith that Daryl did, but with Carl agreeing with Judith way more about helping other communities. Judith asks why Daryl and Michonne feel the way they do about keeping the borders closed, and he tells her that it's because something happened to them in the past. He describes things very subtly and doesn't really go into detail. She somewhat gets it, but wishes Michonne would change her mind still. They've been spending more time together since Carl left, and he'll be leaving again to go help the other places out. Carl promises to do his best to make her change her mind, and proceeds to talk to her later. However, this just leads to an argument where Michonne reiterates that Aaron died because they went out without her permission, but Carl refutes that by saying more people would have died if they weren't there to help. Yumiko and Magna, these are the types of people they can meet out there, loyal, helpful, trusting. Without them, things would have been even worse. He tells her to think about Judith and Gracie. They can keep other communities, families together, alive. They should have been doing that all along. He then leaves with Daryl, Henry, Lydia, and Connie. Judith sneaks out later that day in order to try and find Carl and help in any way she can. However, Michonne would go outside the walls later than she did canonically. This is because A, she doesn't have Negan to give her the idea that Judith might have ran away, and B, she wouldn't be so closely linked to Judith as she was in canon, so she probably wouldn't even notice as soon as she's gone. But given the fact that Judith was being swarmed by about a dozen walkers, I don't see her being able to take down all of them, especially since she got grabbed by one that she thought was already dead canonically. So while she did take out the majority before Michonne showed up, it's likely she'd try fighting the rest, succeed at first, but then get grabbed and eaten by the remaining walkers. This is obviously very gruesome, but that's just the result of Michonne not being as close to Judith here, and also Negan being dead. Michonne and probably some other people from Alexandria would go searching only to come across a reanimated Judith in a pit of walkers, whom Michonne has to put down. This gives her the full realization that she was wrong about closing up Alexandria from other communities, as it only led to the people she cared about going out in secret and dying. Michonne cries as she openly wonders to the group how she's going to tell Carl, what she's going to say, and what he's going to do. She knows that Carl and the others are on their way to the fair at the kingdom, so she doesn't want to ruin things there. She tells everyone to go back to Alexandria and stay until the fair is over. Beth would be present at the fair, as well as Carl and the others after a while. Carl, Jesus, Beth, and Rachel sign Ezekiel's document to unite all 4 communities, although Carl is speaking on behalf of Alexandria instead of consulting the council or Michonne. He wasn't going to at first, but he thought of his little sister back home, and that brought him to sign. Eventually, Sadik and Gabriel arrive at the fair, finding out about the pact, and thinking it's a good idea, but ultimately being super scared to tell Carl about Judith and ruin the moment. However, I think toward the end of the night, Sadik would inform Carl of what happened. This leads to Carl freaking out and immediately heading toward Alexandria to see for himself, despite Sadik trying to calm his friend down. This results in Beth and Sadik going after him, only for both of them to be caught by the Whisperers that night. Carl finally arrives at Alexandria, finding Michonne, who tries to stop him from going into his house, but he pushes past her, yelling, and finds Judith's mangled body. He breaks down and freaks out at Michonne, who is forced to just endure and try to apologize in every way she can. In the morning, everyone at the fair would find out about the deaths of 10 people, all of whom are the same as in canon, but with Beth replacing Tara. Sadik feels insane survivor's guilt, as he did canonically, and thinks the world is punishing him for not telling Carl about the tragedy sooner, or not making Michonne change her mind sooner. Word gets to Jesus at Hilltop, who is forced into becoming leader after Beth's departure. The finale of Season 9 also goes about the same, as I think Carl would sit this one out, but Jesus might be present here. Or maybe not, considering he's forced into being full-time leader now. There's no Negan or Judith, so Judith being saved by Negan is completely avoided. Carl would just be helping to keep the people of Alexandria safe during the blizzard, showing that he's a very capable leader, even when crippled by grief and anger. Season 10 still begins with the same training scene at Oceanside, but Aaron is not present. Instead, he's replaced by Jesus. Since there's no RJ, the group would never discover a Whisperer mask, so nobody gets super paranoid. Michonne is just really upset about how she failed Carl and how it's impacted him. They have to cross into Whisperer territory to stop the forest fire from the satellite, and nothing has changed there. Alpha decides to send her walkers to Alexandria for 2 days straight, which leads to the group going to talk to her. Carl would want to go for obvious reasons, but like Carol, similarly preps himself with his father's Colt Python. He wants to end Alpha for what she's caused. The deaths of Aaron, Beth, Enid, Judith. Michonne is also partially to blame, but Alpha is clearly the bigger issue here. Alpha would only be able to point out the 2 times they crossed into her land, since there was no Whisperer mask to investigate. Carol fails her shot at Alpha, and Michonne apologizes for her. But Carl doesn't apologize. He raises his revolver and fires at Alpha, but Michonne tries to stop him, leading to it hitting her non-fatally. The Whisperers begin attacking with some firing shots, while the others chase our group down with knives. Either way, Daryl and the others are on the run. Since they're getting attacked by both blades and gunshots, I'm gonna say Michonne and Laura get injured slightly here. They manage to fight off the Whisperers that attack with knives and just run into the woods. At a certain point, Alpha stops sending the Whisperers, and they just head back home. But Carol's paranoia keeps the group on edge, as she believes she sees more of them, when they're not really there. Michonne gets angry at Carl for nearly getting them all killed and potentially starting up another war. Carl snaps back that he could have killed her if she didn't get in the way. She always gets in the way. Everything is ruined because of her. Daryl tries to get Carl to chill out, but he's furious, so he storms off to keep watch with Carol. Neither of them have been sleeping very much, and both are in similar spots right now. She offers Carl some of her pills, but he turns it down. Carl tries to convince Carol to go to bed and let him take watch, but she doesn't want to. The path Carol's going down makes Carl rethink his own actions, and that maybe he should stop on his quest for vengeance before he goes too far. However, when Carol starts getting her supposed hallucinations, Carl is also there to see the Whisperers, which makes him realize, wait, Carol was actually right. So him reconsidering his actions based on Carol being a weirdo has basically just been completely undone, and he's back on his warpath. They get back to Alexandria in the morning and find that the Walker attacks have been stopped. While Alpha should theoretically retaliate with sending her horde, she has to think of Lydia, so she decides not to, even though it makes her look kinda weak. When the tree falls at Hilltop, Jesus would be taking charge, which kind of serves as his reawakening to recognizing he's a good leader. I think Michonne and Ezekiel's kiss might actually begin something in this version, since Michonne has been without a lover the entire story. And now she's just got so much stress and grief in her life that I think something new might look good to her. Michonne takes Ezekiel back to Hilltop with Eugene and the others that were with her. Judith wouldn't be there, but I don't think she made too big of an impact. What is very unfortunate is that Negan isn't there to help save Lydia from the ambush that Margot starts. But thankfully, Carl arrives, aiming his revolver at her from behind. During this, he remembers the story Daryl told him of Rick stopping him from ending Jim's life by using that very gun. The words he said, "We don't kill the living." Carl tells Margot to drop her weapon, and she does. He then comforts Lydia before everyone shows up, where he's able to easily explain what happened. He's obviously a lot more believable than Negan is, so Gage, Margot, and the other dude end up in jail for a while. The night Michonne stays at Hilltop would be spent with Ezekiel in a pretty similar manner to their comic counterparts. However, in the morning, Michonne would look closer at Ezekiel's neck to see the tumor. He tells her that he's likely got cancer, and she apologizes for this. Lydia doesn't go in a cell since there's no question of any prisoners being let out. Daryl and Sadik also have no reason to go to Hilltop. Without Negan outside, Amelia and Milo die due to the walkers and the bus. In the next episode, Carol and Daryl still go out, with Carol wanting to destroy Alpha's herd, but this time, Carl would join them. He'd be on Carol's side for this, with Daryl just kinda trying to get them to think about it more, but ultimately being unable to stop them. So he comes with. They find a Whisperer and bring him to Alexandria for questioning. Lydia isn't in a cell, but I'm sure that Carol would still want to see if she recognizes him. Since Aaron isn't there, they never make contact with Mary/Gamma, so Carol would probably just keep riding with Lydia until they find some random Whisperer. Lydia then runs off, and Dante kills Sadik after accidentally tipping him off to his true nature. The following fight with Rosita plays out the same as in canon as well. Carl is heartbroken that Sadik is now dead, as the two were very close since Carl brought him in. The thought that Dante lived as one of them this whole time once again gets Carl torn on who to trust. It seems like everyone is leading him astray now. Gabriel enters Dante's cell, pulling out a knife after his little speech, but Carl arrives yelling for him to stop. Dante and Gabriel look at Carl, who also has a knife in hand. Gabriel moves away from Dante, quickly locking the gate and taking Carl outside. He asks Carl why he came down there, and the boy replies that it was the same reason he did, to kill Dante. But seeing Gabriel about to do it made him wonder where his humanity had gone. Gabriel rebuts that by deciding what happens to him in the normal fashion with the council, they're playing the game Dante and the Whisperers want them to play. Carl replies that he knows, but that's why they have to be united on the decision, to prove that they won't destroy each other over him. Going to take matters into their own hands doesn't help at all. They've lost too much to just do things on a whim now. Gabriel can't disagree, so he walks away, and Carl glances at the holding room door, looking at the knife one more time, before also leaving. Over time, rumors would spread about the Alpha's daughter still being alive due to what one of the Whisperers saw. Mary would hear about this and take him to Alpha, not wanting him to believe what he says. Alpha swiftly handles him by making him look like a fool before killing him in front of all of them. But even so, Mary can't seem to shake how real what he was describing felt, so she heads to Alexandria to find out the truth. Luckily for her, people have just left Alexandria as well. I think Carol might go to search for the Horde again, but I don't think she'd find much luck. Meanwhile, Daryl would convince everyone that finding Lydia should be a top priority, since her being with them is what protects them most. So Jesus sends Jerry and Magna's group, minus Yumiko and Luke, to help them search. Carol runs into Mary while searching for Alpha's herd and aims her bow. Mary asks her if it's true that Alpha's spawn still lives, and she tells her yes. Of course, Mary is torn over this knowledge and tries to run away, but Carol shoots her in the leg with an arrow, preparing to bring her back to Alexandria. But on her way there, she comes across Daryl and the others who are searching for Lydia. This only further confirms to Mary that Lydia still lives, and Daryl, being angry that Carol ran off again, decides for all of them to head to Alexandria now, since they've got a prisoner. There, Mary offers to tell them the location of Alpha's herd, in exchange for getting to see her nephew, the baby that they saved from Hilltop. The group takes the location and heads out to find the horde, with Carl choosing to join them. They end up in the cave with the horde, and Carl basically just replaces Aaron here. This means things go the same, and they all escape, minus Magna and Connie. Mary is currently locked up with Dante, and they both discuss what's going on. Dante asks whether the information she's giving them is good, and she replies that it is. Dante is confused as he thought she'd be a rat, trying to lead these people into a trap, but she's not. She's taking the straight path, and he can't really process that. Daryl and the others haven't returned yet, so Gabriel leaves with Scott and a few others to find them and deal with the supposed herd coming. But it turns out that the herd was a lie to lure some of them out, and Beta sneaks into Alexandria. Once there, he kills a few people to turn them and cause a distraction for the others. That way, he can slip into the cells and secure Mary and Dante. Beta ensures Dante's loyalty, and then frees him, and then threatens Mary to come with him for a painless death. Laura tries to stop Beta with her axe, but Dante fights her off, allowing Beta to disarm her and quickly finish her off. Mary makes an attempt to escape during the chaos, but since Beta took the reins on the fight with Laura, Dante chases after her. She tries to escape, but Dante tackles her to the ground and begins beating her up. Of course, she tries to fight back, but Dante was able to overpower Sadik, so I think he'd have this in the bag. Mary gets knocked unconscious, and Beta and Dante leave Alexandria with her. However, it results in Dante and Beta being forced to leave her behind when Gabriel and the others show up. Carl makes it back to Alexandria instead of Aaron, but the others get separated. Gabriel mentions that Dante got out during the scramble and is probably back with Alpha, spilling all of their secrets. He's the one who built the trap door that let Beta in. And Carl told him to let him live? Gabriel's angry about this, and Carl has no response really. Rosita doesn't have to go with Mary to Hilltop since she wasn't injured. Instead, Carl joins her with Gracie as he wants to spend some time with her. She doesn't have a father anymore, and he doesn't have a sister. She was taken in by Michonne, but Michonne is currently gone. Speaking of, no Judith means that there'd be no reason for Luke to bring up the library he knows about. And even if he did, just because he wanted to get some books, Michonne has no reason to go. She's more upset due to Judith and Aaron's deaths, so she just wants to focus on their actual destination. Not going to the library means they don't run into Virgil initially, but they would still run into him at Oceanside. It might be a little later, since he didn't rush to leave the library, but he would still arrive. This means Michonne still goes off with him to his island, and everything plays out similarly there. The only difference is just a small one, that her visions have nothing to do with Rick, and she doesn't leave to find Rick at the end of the episode. So I mean, she'll just be here for the foreseeable future, but nothing really major. Daryl arrives at Hilltop shortly after Carl, with Lydia in tow. And since Rosita isn't at Hilltop, she doesn't interfere with Eugene's e-dating. Because Jesus is alive, he'd likely want to make a stand for Hilltop when he finds out Alpha's bringing in her horde. A lot of people don't like that plan, but not defending it doesn't make much difference if they go after Alexandria next. No matter what, they're getting a fight. Although Negan isn't with the Whisperers, I think Dante might still try to block off the roads, since he would likely know about them from his time in Alexandria. Jesus and Earl take the lead on preparing Hilltop for war, which is really sick. At some point, Carol shows up as well, reuniting with Ezekiel. When Alden prevents Mary from seeing Adam, Carl is probably a lot less nice than Aaron was. For one, Enid was a big loss for Carl as well, so that doesn't excuse Alden's behavior. 2, Alden was a savior before he joined them, and Carl would definitely point that out. It's not like Mary's story is any different from his. In a fit of rage, Alden just runs off with Adam, meaning that Carl was pretty much right. Eugene informs Stephanie of the great threat that his group's about to take on, and she encourages him to survive it, revealing where she is located. This hypes him up for the battle, and he heads out to prepare. Since Judith isn't here, she wouldn't fix up Daryl's jacket for him, so he doesn't have it here. Very unfortunate. The other less notable changes are that Jesus is in the front lines in place of Aaron, which pretty much finishes his arc of stepping up to become a real leader. Rosita not being here doesn't really change too much. Aaron is once again replaced by Carl to carry Luke around after they escape. He comes across Dante in the woods and asks why he would help them do this, even after he saved his life. Dante replies that Sadik was a good man. He wasn't supposed to die. If Carl was friends with him, he probably doesn't deserve it either. As the walkers he's herded begin approaching, he tells Carl to go. And so Carl takes Luke and begins running off, while Dante kills the few walkers. Meanwhile, walkers attack Mary, Alden, and Kelly. As a moment of redemption, Mary locks Alden and Kelly into a vehicle, distracting and leading the walkers away. After that, she takes them all out and relaxes for a moment. Someone yells, "Look out!" and she turns to see Beta, who barely misses stabbing her with his knife due to the distraction. Beta and Mary look to see Jesus approaching them. He draws a sword as Beta pulls out his other knife, refusing to let this guy stop him. The two begin their clash, with Beta's power being matched by Jesus' technique and skill. This fight actually does happen in the comics, but the situation is a little different here. You see, Jesus just isn't as cool and probably not as strong as he was in the comic universe, and Beta is probably stronger in the show, given how much he's able to do. He nearly kills Daryl in their first encounter, kills Laura effortlessly, beats Rosita pretty easily, nearly kills Negan, and takes a slice and 2 knives in his eyes. He just pulls them out, and in the comics he gets shot once in the side and dies. So Beta clearly takes this one, however it would still be a really cool fight to see adapted. Mary would probably jump in to stab Beta when Jesus is about to be killed, but Beta simply shrugs it off and shoves her aside. This slight distraction is enough to let Jesus slash Beta with his sword, cutting him pretty badly. Beta retaliates by grabbing the blade with his hand and running Jesus into a tree before knocking him to the ground. He then tosses his sword to the side and turns his attention back to Mary. Mary gets chased across the forest until Alden shoots an arrow at Beta, causing him to flee. Mary tells Alden and Kelly where Jesus is, but Jesus shows up himself. That way it's pretty clear Jesus lost the fight, but Beta is heavily wounded and failed to kill or even significantly hurt Mary or Jesus, although he is pretty beat up at the moment. Back with Dante, he finds Lydia and tells Alpha where he kept her. The key difference here is that he would actually take Alpha to her and not double-cross her like Negan. So Alpha enters the room, finding Lydia trying to escape, only to throw her to the ground. Lydia obviously can't overpower her mother, but she does still bite one of Alpha's fingers. Sadly, this is where Lydia meets her demise at the hands of her own mother. Dante watches, somewhat reconsidering what he's part of, after seeing just how different both sides have been. After Lydia is killed, Alpha stands up, looking at her hand, feeling stronger than ever. But that wound will never heal, leaving a permanent symbol of what she's done. Alpha demands Dante stay behind and wait for her daughter to turn so that she can herd them with the others, and he does so. Beta and Alpha meet up once more, explaining to each other what has been done. Dante takes the rank of Gamma now that Mary has deserted them, but Beta is seeming less and less useful as time goes on. He failed to secure or kill Mary both times he tried. His biggest success was bringing Dante to her. Perhaps it's a sign. With Alpha now living, the communities have a much bigger problem on their hands. Lydia was the one thing keeping Alpha from just wiping all of them out, and now she's gone. And without Negan there to reveal her location, the group would be on a wild search for Lydia, just for it to be unsuccessful. All the while, Alpha would be at her strongest, revealing to her followers that she had lied to them. She did not go through with killing her daughter before. She was weak. She then has Beta carry in Lydia's walker and declares that she is weak no more, and neither will they be. So once they've built up their army once again, they will crush all those that oppose them. The rest of the Whisperers are happy to hear this, and our group is not looking like they're in the best spot right now. Luckily, they take refuge in the same hospital as in canon, since Hilltop got all burned up. Jesus and Alden stay behind to keep an eye out on the Whisperers, and Daryl never runs into the rogue Whisperer since Beta isn't losing his mind. Alpha is still alive and leading them. Also, I imagine if Beta was able to locate the group with the voices in his head, Alpha would probably be able to as well, since she's actually smart. So they're able to successfully surround the hospital with a massive herd. Sadly, we don't have Aaron, Negan, Judith, Lydia, RJ, or Dog here, but we do have Carl, Michonne, Jesus, and Mary. Jesus and Alden get surrounded by a bunch of walkers, which is what happened to Aaron and Alden in canon. But in the next episode, there's like 2 Whisperers left, so I guess they escaped or killed all of them off screen. Despite having a gun at their heads, I have no idea how they managed to do that, but at least with Jesus here instead of Aaron, it makes more sense. He's got all those cool skills, so him being able to disarm the guy with the gun works. But what he doesn't expect is for Beta to show up as they're fighting and just run him into the ground. While the two fight their rematch, Alden gets rushed by all the other Whisperers who nearly kill him, cutting him a bit. But luckily for Alden, one of the Whisperers is shot dead, causing the others to halt their attacks. As they turn around, they see a young blonde woman holding a Glock 17, which she fires until empty. If you're wondering why I mentioned this gun specifically, Google who uses it in the show. Not quite as iconic as Rick's Colt Python, but you'll probably understand. After running out of ammo, she gets rushed by the remaining few Whisperers, only for them to be attacked as well. Maggie arrived with some backup. Elijah and Cole proceed to wipe out the others, while Maggie sends an arrow at Beta. Jesus bounces off a tree, kicking Beta in the chest. Cole then tosses Jesus his blade, and he slashes Beta in order to prevent himself from being charged again. And with that, Beta bleeds out, embracing his death. Maggie checks on Alden, who is happy to see her, but his wounds are too great. The blonde with the gun apologizes to Alden for not being able to save him in time, but he says that without her help, it would have been worse. He locks hands with Maggie and smiles before bleeding out. Shortly after, Jesus takes off Beta's mask, surprised, and Cole asks, "Is that?" before getting cut off by Maggie, who says that they need to get going. Also, if you're wondering why Beta is out here with random whisperers, I think Alpha would want Dante to have the spotlight as a chance to prove himself. So he'd be in charge of infiltrating the hospital, while Beta makes sure no one tries to interfere with the herd. Carl would stay inside the base, while the others go out into the herd to help with Luke's plan. But I think Michonne would want to go out, since she's better at close range, and Carol should stay inside, since she is really good with a bow. But once the horde tightens, and she can't really get a clear shot, Carol leaves to go after Alpha. At the same time, Carl and Gabriel have to deal with the Whisperers entering the hospital, which they do a lot better at, since Carl can help Gabriel fight them off. Dante is leading this charge, showing up to attack Carl, while Gabriel fights off the rest of the Whisperers. Dante says that he doesn't want to do this, running Carl into a wall and quickly taking his gun from his hand. He knocks it to the ground, and Carl struggles to break free. Gabriel is about to be killed by the other Whisperers, but Maggie and the others show up to save him, ending the last few enemies. As Dante turns around, Carl slices him with his knife before shoulder bashing him onto the ground. Gabriel prepares to gun him down, but Carl tells him not to, so he just knocks him out with his shotgun. As for Alpha, she sees Carol preparing to end her, only for Daryl and Michonne to show up and give her the slice. Now they just have the herd to worry about, which they don't have Lydia for. Instead, Carol agrees to take the herd off the cliff, though it would be suicide. She insists she'll be alright, but Daryl follows her, saving her at the last second. Alright, so Season 10's last few episodes are mostly going to be the same, but I'll point out the changes as we go, and then we can get to what Shane's been up to. I also need to make an additional note about Jadis, because in the previous parts of this What If, I said that she just left and took Keith, since he was still around. But the new show, The Ones Who Live, tells us a big part of why she left Alexandria was because she lost her people. However, it is important to note that another huge part was the fact that she felt like an outsider, with even Gabriel not fully getting her after all that time. Now in this scenario, her people did live, but some would have been killed in the battle against the Saviors, some wouldn't like living near the people they just betrayed, as they'd feel unsafe like the Coalition could strike any day. With Jadis being less connected to the people outside of her own little bubble, and wanting some sort of higher purpose as well as her people's safety, it's entirely possible she still goes with the CRM. But once fully immersed, she learns that the best way to protect her people is not to mention them to the CRM. Maybe she even visits some of her top dogs every year like she did with Gabriel canonically. This also gives me a chance to talk about Jadis's people, as I honestly forgot about them still being alive in this scenario, so that's my mistake. But with the junkyard being a literal dump, now with no real leader and the remaining saviors running around trying to take power, the community would probably fall. Some would die desperately trying to get supplies, some would die to the saviors' little group, and the rest would flee and join up with the other communities. The ones that don't would likely meet their deaths at the hand of the Whisperers, so not much really changes overall. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can now talk about Season 10's bonus episodes. We're gonna kinda rapid fire through these, so let's go. Episode 17 of Season 10, Maggie talks a lot about how she really left because of Negan, and she didn't really want to return because of him. That was something I needed to carefully consider because this universe's Maggie doesn't have to live with the fact that Negan is still alive. However, I think since she left later on in the scenario and it was more of a genuine attempt at helping the other communities, we can justify her returning at the same time. She would lament to Daryl about how she should have stayed. If she was there, maybe they wouldn't have lost Aaron, Alden, Judith, and Beth. But Daryl assures her that she just did what she thought was right. Michonne is there too, and it'd be nice to see her interacting with Maggie once more. Maggie would also be sad that Beth died in her absence, and that Herschel will never really get to know his aunt. I guess you could also say that Maggie would still leave because killing Negan didn't actually give her any satisfaction. Alright, episode 18 would just be a normal hunting trip since Daryl never met Leah. Without Dog, they don't find the shack, and there aren't any memories for Daryl and Carol to argue about since Daryl never left to find Rick. Episode 19. Aaron is replaced by Carl, but Carl has less issues with staying out longer than Aaron does. Most of the pair's conflict centers around how they handled Dante in the prior episodes and resolving that conflict. Carl gets attacked by a boar in the warehouse, but Gabriel saves him from it. Gabriel proceeds to kill Maze even after they've convinced him to stop, which horrifies Carl. He asks why he did that, and Gabriel says that they couldn't bring him back with them. He killed his brother's family. In the back of his mind, it's what he never got to do to Dante, and that's why he feels justified in it. The two find May's brother still alive, but not for much longer after he steals the gun from Gabriel. Once it's over, Carl wants to go back home, as he can't stand being around Gabriel after killing Maze. So totally just an inverse of Aaron's thing, where at the beginning, he wanted to go home, and then at the end, he was just like, let's keep going. Carl is the exact opposite. He wants to go home after seeing what Gabriel did. Alright, now for the rest of the episodes, nothing really changes. I guess Here's Negan wouldn't really happen because Negan isn't there, so like he can't, I don't know, smile at Maggie. But obviously the background information of Negan still happened. So now with all that preamble and wrapping up loose ends of season 10, we can get to what you guys have been waiting for probably multiple parts now. And that is where Shane has been. Now if you'll remember, Shane did join up with the Reapers at some point during the 6-year time skip. In my original assessment of this alliance, I initially thought that it would just mean the Reapers would be giga amped against Maggie and our main group. Having 6 more members as well as Dog would definitely give them an edge. However, upon rewatching season 11, I realized that this just wouldn't really make that much sense. We've got Pope, who initially didn't like Daryl and only grew to like him due to his ability to get intel about Maggie and her group. But we're a few years off from that point, so Shane is really gonna have to earn his keep to gain any sort of respect. At the same time, Tara, Bob, and Noah would certainly have their doubts about the Reapers' insane mentality. I mean, they massacre communities and claim they're acting on God's will. Megan and Mika could definitely be more susceptible to this, but that's assuming that Shane is. The most unhinged my way or I'll get you alone so I can kill you and leave you on a highway guy ever. He's clashed with Rick, he's clashed with the governor, he's clashed with the militia, he's clashed with Dawn, and he's overcome every one of them. Not only that, but he's been able to literally take over or destroy their groups in every instance, with the one exception being Rick's group. So I'd imagine he'd be fully confident in his ability to take control if Pope ever crossed him, which is very likely given the fact that Pope would have almost no respect for him whatsoever. The one thing holding Shane back from trying anything is his connections. He's got his whole group to look after, and he has Leah, his former girlfriend. So I'd imagine he'd try and make things go as smoothly as possible for everyone's sake. It would probably be the most humbling experience Shane has ever had. Watching his group, the people he cares about, be forced into submission by someone else. This would kind of be like the Negan to his Rick in a way. And I think we'd see Tara not wanting to comply with the harsh terms Pope enforces, especially with their niece Megan on the line. She doesn't want to see her twisted into someone she can't recognize. Bob and Noah feel similarly, with Noah referencing how things were when he was under the foot of Dawn, before Shane helped him. Shane would constantly be trying to get Leah to understand why Pope is insane, but given that Shane also fits that bill to a degree, it's going to be way harder for her to believe than when Daryl told her. And I think given Shane's attempts to ease the waters, Tara and the others would act before he does. They try to either escape or do something against protocol, like refuse to kill an enemy, or rebel against Pope in some way. But they'd get caught, which would get Noah killed, as I think he's just the easiest guy to kill between him, Tara, and Bob, due to him being the youngest, smallest, and having a leg issue. And so we get kind of like the lineup moment for Shane, where he is forced to prove his loyalty and prove that he isn't involved in these schemes by striking down these deserters. Ever since we found you, you've been on rocky waters. Well, now's your chance, son. Prove to me, to God, that you truly believe the same as all your brothers and sisters standing next to you. And so Shane is forced to kill Bob and Tara in front of Megan and Mika. Granted, the two girls are now teenagers, but doing this would absolutely change their view of Shane. All the while, Leah would be trying to vouch for him and make Pope stop this, but he'd shut her down as he does in canon. But luckily for Shane, Dog would sense the turmoil within Leah, Shane, Tara, Mika, Megan, and Bob, all the people he's been close with, and would do what trained dogs do when their owners are being threatened. He attacks Pope, allowing for Shane to take the moment of surprise and yell for his friends to get out of there. He then charges past some Reapers in order to take Mika and Megan away. But here's where we really need to dig into how many Reapers they'd be dealing with. Based on the wiki, which isn't 100% reliable, but I'm not going to headcount all the Reapers, so I'm going with it. There were 21 Reapers that were alive at the time they were introduced in late season 10. Dog's mother and Matthew Shaw both died before Leah met Daryl. Also, Reaper 4 would have been alive, as they were killed by Pope after the Reapers claimed Meridian, which hasn't happened yet. That puts our number back to 22. But given that we see Pope kill a guy for cowardly behavior in season 11, as well as Reaper 4, who, as I stated prior, we can infer that the Reapers likely had more members beforehand. They're dying in battles, and Pope is killing them if they do something he doesn't like. So our number could be closer to 25 to 30 at this point, years before we even hear about the Reapers in the main story. It's also worth mentioning that the first Reaper we meet blows himself up, so they're also doing that, which could mean we have even more than 30. And we've seen just how physically capable some of the Reapers really are. They're insanely skilled at hunting down their prey, taking them by surprise, and just wiping them out. Maggie's entire new group is killed by the Reapers, with the one exception being Elijah. He only got his leg broken. But now that we've gotten to just how big of a threat Shane is up against here, we can return to him facing that threat. Shane would be on the run with Megan and Mika next to him, and Pope would kill Dog before ordering everyone present to go after him and his people. Leah leads a squad out as well, hesitantly due to Shane being someone she cares a lot for. While running in the forest, Shane comes up on a few walkers, telling Mika and Megan to keep going while he deals with them. Shane then easily kills them, but this distraction leads to some Reapers running up on him. Luckily, he's learned their strategies from his time spent with them, so he's able to react pretty quickly. He fights 2 of them off before a 3rd and 4th join in and completely overwhelm him. Shane gets cut up and slammed into a tree as the Reapers approach to end his life. But one of them gets shot in the head and falls to the ground, allowing Shane to barely get back up, taking the dead Reaper's weapon and striking while the others are distracted. One of the Reapers goes after the shooter, whom Shane sees and deduces that it's Mika. Shane battles the last 2 Reapers here, but now that he's injured, it's much harder. Still, his love for Mika allows him to push onward, striking one more enemy down before walkers close in, helping him to barely escape death. Shane limps on, trying to save Mika from her assailant. He's eventually able to find the attacker sneaking up on him. The 2 get into a scuffle, causing them to roll on the ground. Shane musters all the strength he has, but ultimately can't make it up faster than his enemy. He's far too worn down by this point, and I would really consider this sequence to be similar to Rick's departure in Season 9. He's going in and out of consciousness for brief moments, seeing some dream sequences that inspires him to find the rage, the hatred, the loyalty. It's the only way that gets this done. He needs to save his family. This allows him to barely catch the Reaper's weapon and hold it centimeters from his face. But these few moments save his life as Leah arrives, knocking out her comrade in order to save Shane. She tells him to get up, and Mika returns once more to help Leah lift Shane up. Leah tells them that they need to get out of here. They aren't her family, but they're still a family, and she doesn't want her people snuffing them out. This is the only time she can help them. After this, they'll have to find some other way. Shane tries to make one last effort in heated breaths to get her to come with them, but she refuses. Her place is with the Reapers. And so Mika helps Shane escape in the night as Leah returns to her squad. The next morning, Pope demands a status report from everyone, and Carver steps up, saying that Bob and Tara were taken care of. Leah also clarifies that they found a Reaper who was knocked out on the ground with no sign of Shane. Someone must have snuck up on him and helped Shane get away. Pope demands that they do better, and that if they ever cross someone from Shane's little posse again, they kill on sight. Meanwhile, Mika finds Shane a place to rest, while she travels and does hard work to keep them both alive. Pretty much a parallel to the canon Rick and Carl following the destruction of the prison. After some time, Mika runs into a woman and a kid, aiming the Glock 17 Shane gave to her. The woman introduces herself as Maggie Ree and her son Herschel. She offers to help Mika as all she's been doing in the past few years is helping communities and people she's met. Mika takes her back to her home and shows Maggie her wounded friend lying on a bed. Maggie takes one good look, immediately wincing at the sight of him. It's Shane, the man that killed Rick Grimes, Andrea, and made them lose their home at the prison all those years ago, not to mention her own father. Shane looks up at Maggie, realizing who he's looking at, and realizes that he just might be screwed. Maggie walks out of the room immediately, and Mika follows her and asks what's wrong. She unpacks her history with Shane from when the apocalypse first started. This puts Mika into an extremely confused position as she starts to piece things together about stories Shane has told her from before her family joined Woodbury. But now that she's hearing it from the other perspective, it sounds like Shane might not be the person he's represented himself as. Maggie tries to help Mika through processing all these feelings, probably hoping that she'll decide to leave Shane behind after hearing it. But she doesn't. Mika heads back into the room and looks down at him annoyed. Shane asks what Maggie told her, and Mika says that it's enough to know that he's been lying. She then starts going through multiple times Shane motivated her to do things when she reminded him of his past situations, and now look where they are, on the run from some crazy people. Shane finally hears enough, sitting up to tell Mika something. Everything he's done was in service of her and the others. There wouldn't have been a Woodbury without him. She would have been a walker if it weren't for him. Some people had to die to make that happen, but it wasn't her, not their people. Mika understands where he's coming from due to her time with Shane, but she still feels as though it's not right. She returns to Maggie, saying that she's not leaving him. Maggie clearly wants to help Mika here, but the cost of bringing Shane along with being fully responsible for his recovery is kind of large. She ultimately decides to do it though, as she doesn't just want to leave the kid behind. So she has her group help take Shane and Mika back to where they're staying, which I believe at this time should be Knoxville. Georgie and the twins eventually leave Knoxville to search for more places and lose contact with Maggie and the others. Mika continues growing a bond with Maggie and the wardens, while Shane does his best to heat her away from getting too attached. He's also probably fully recovered after some time. He seems aware that this place won't last long, and based on Maggie telling us about Knoxville's fall, he's completely right. We don't know the details of how it fell apart, whether it was walkers, raiders, lack of supplies, civil issues, but we do know that it did, which forces Maggie, Mika, Shane, and the wardens on the road yet again. During their travels, Shane makes an effort to speak to Maggie, as they've been living in the same place for a long time, but she cuts him off as she doesn't want to build that bridge, especially now when she has Herschel to take care of. I think Mika would kind of be the glue between the bricks here, as she is an older sister figure to Herschel, but she is also very closely connected to Shane, being kind of like a daughter. After traveling for so long, they end up on a village called Meridian, where they take refuge and try to ensure the survival of the community. Now, given the fact that Maggie seems somewhat knowledgeable on the Reapers by the time we see her in Season 11, I'm gonna assume they didn't just attack Meridian with no prior signs of their existence. So I do think it's possible that they knew about them from some brief encounter, word of mouth, footprints, and battle scenes, something like that. But Shane, having knowledge of these guys prior, is able to tell Maggie what they're up against. Maggie is very hesitant to believe anything Shane says, especially if he used to run with these people who are apparently such violent monsters. But Shane tells them that they're not going to win this fight, as they specialize in wiping out their prey once they've got them in their crosshairs. But Maggie doesn't listen, thinking that they can make a stand at Meridian. One night, Mika finds Shane packing his bags and confronts him about running away, but he appeals to what had happened as soon as they cross Pope. Noah, Bob, Tara, Megan, all of them gone. They barely made it out with Leah's help, but they won't be so lucky if they're trying to fight back this time. Mika asks him, what about Maggie? What about all the people we've built a life here with? Shane simply looks at her. Not you too. Shane tries to explain that he already tried to convince Maggie, but she's too damn attached to this place. How many places have they called home now? Woodbury, the hospital, none of them are special. They all fell because of one attack, except for the ones they're up against now, the Reapers. Shane walks by her, saying, come on, we need to go. But Mika doesn't follow. Shane turns around to face her once again, and Mika says that she can't just leave everyone here to die. These people, Maggie saved them. Running away doesn't help them. Shane can't believe that Maggie got through to her like this, and to think he saved her life. He then leaves, with Mika sitting down to cry after losing her father figure. She later visits Maggie, informing her of Shane's departure and helping to plan against the upcoming Reaper assault. But sadly, Shane was right. Meridian falls, with only Maggie, Mika, and a few others escaping. Now, in Season 11's first episode, we would see Michonne replace Lydia on the weapons expedition due to Lydia being dead. Jesus replaces Alden for the same reason. It's also possible Jerry and Rosita are replaced by Carl or Mika, since the two both have families to take care of. However, due to Carl and Michonne's rough spot they've been going through, maybe having them together might not be a great idea. After they arrive back at Alexandria, they find out that some of Maggie's old wardens are still alive. Agatha, Frost, and Duncan return, with the three attributing their survival to one man, Shane. That's right, just when you thought you'd never see him again, he slowly enters Alexandria, sizing the place up, and everyone stares at him. Maggie, Mika, Daryl, Carl, and Michonne are all in shock when they detect him. Carl immediately draws his revolver, Michonne her sword, and Daryl starts walking at a fast pace toward Shane. Mika wonders what is going on, and Maggie looks at her before telling her that this was the group she told her about, the one Shane hurt. As Daryl approaches Shane, the latter looks at him and says his name in a slightly confused tone. Daryl, looks like you made it, huh? It's not a bad place you got here. Shane is cut off as Daryl hits him in the face, causing Shane to hit the ground. He realizes what just happened, muttering, "Yep, didn't think so." Shane quickly gets up, about to strike Daryl back, only to see multiple people run forward. Among them, Mika. He's surprised to see her here too, along with Maggie and Michonne. Mika hugs Shane, and he embraces her, causing Agatha to suggest that they talk things out instead. But Maggie replies that she isn't sure how that's gonna go, as she looks at Michonne and Carl's angry faces. The main council, as well as Maggie and her wardens, discuss what to do with Shane. For very obvious reasons, Michonne, Carl, and Daryl are very against him having anything to do with their community. Mika is the main person vouching for him, due to Shane being her father figure and doing so much to keep her and their group safe. He's not the same person that did whatever bad things he did to them all that time ago, and she's proof of that. Seeing the young girl standing alone, Duncan, Agatha, and Frost are willing to support her, as he did save their lives as they fled the Reapers. Of course, in canon, they survived anyway, but they don't know that. With the food situation being a major issue, Gabriel and the others who don't know Shane try to turn their attention to that. Maggie says that Meridian has a lot of food and supplies, but they'd have to take it back from the Reapers. Daryl questions Maggie, recalling that she said Shane was one of them. Maggie hesitantly admits this, and Mika tells them that Shane was the one who knew the Reapers would take over. They spent time with them, and he knows how they fight, what they do. Michonne notices that she was also a Reaper by what she's saying, meaning she'd have all the info Shane has. Mika smugly replies that, yeah, she has all that info, but she's not going without him. The group exchanges glances as they realize that they are going to have to work with Shane. For this, Carl, Michonne, Daryl, and Maggie are the main ones who get looked at for approval, as they were the most deeply affected by his actions. He killed Michonne's best friend, and both Maggie and Carl's fathers. Daryl is willing to do whatever keeps them alive, even if it means working with the guy who captured and imprisoned him. Maggie has a connection to both the Wardens and Mika, who all vouch for Shane, and she was willing to let Negan help them in canon, so I think she'd accept Shane with even more pressure here. That leaves Michonne, who knows she's been on tough ground with Carl recently and that his family is gone. She doesn't want to force him to work with someone who caused that, so she leaves the decision ultimately down to him. Carl, of course, wants to say no, but looks at Mika, recognizing how she genuinely meant what she said about Shane. And being the optimist that he vowed to be, he chooses to agree to let Shane help them temporarily. He really doesn't want to, but he knows he'd be a hypocrite to keep Dante alive and constantly try to get people to be less hateful and murderous, only to switch up when it's someone who hurt him. Mika approaches Shane in his cell, sitting with him and letting him know that she basically just saved his life. Shane sarcastically questions this, as now he's going to be sent on a suicide mission against a group who wants him dead, with a group who also wants him dead. Mika simply replies, "Yep, so you better get your things, we're leaving soon." Shane sits there as she walks away, and in typical Shane fashion, turns and rubs his head a few times. Now we have a real question on our hands. With a lot of new characters being here, who is going on this little expedition? Let's first grab our key players. Maggie and her wardens, Shane because duh, Daryl because he's a major asset to the group in a combat scenario, but now I've got to ask, is there a limit to how many people can go? Well, not technically, but Alexandria is crumbling and it needs people to defend and provide for it. So I'd say the canon number of people, 11, should be just the right number to go by. Just by the characters I've named so far, we've got 8. So our last 3 should really be people who can either be major assets in battle or characters who have a real need to be there. For that reason, I'm going to cross out our 2 filler slots, Roy and Gage. They die immediately in canon, and you probably forgot they existed before they joined the squad. And you probably forgot they existed before I mentioned them here. So they're not very notable. Gabriel has a family to take care of, and he's a key member of the council. Alexandria is going to need someone to lead now that Carl and Michonne are leaving. Michonne is not a question in a fight, and she wants to keep an eye on Shane, and as if there aren't enough, Carl shouldn't be questioned on why he's going either. Our last slot would then be filled by Jesus, as he's probably their best fighter given his recent performance against Beta twice. Mika would want to go, but be denied as Shane doesn't want her getting hurt, and neither would Maggie. But I do think that Mika would follow them and join, which they really can't do anything about for now. Plus, if you think about it, we do need a replacement for Dog, I guess. Without a guide through DC, which was provided by Negan and canon, they really don't have a way to navigate through the tunnels. This means Shane is probably going to be even more ignored and insulted than Negan was, since at least they could look to him for guidance. Because we don't get to see the other paths in the tunnels, I have no clue how their journey would go. They likely get lost in the tunnels, which I can only assume would make it much harder for them to make it out safely or quickly. And of course, they could also end up splitting into groups to search every path, which would make things even more likely to give them trouble. There's also the possibility they just go through the exact same spot that they did in canon, but I mean, it's a lot less likely now that Negan isn't there. Speaking of, Negan's little comments and jabs would be more funny to listen to with Shane's "man, let me tell you something" attitude. With Roy and Gage both dying despite having a guide through the tunnels, I feel like in a scenario where they don't have that guide and get stuck stumbling with a ton of walkers, someone would still die, even with our group of MVPs. Gage gets jumped by a big walker that makes no sound, Maggie nearly dies after stumbling and getting grabbed by walkers, and they only beat the massive horde with a grenade Daryl acquired after finding a dying Roy. So it seems like the circumstances they got in canon were pretty lucky and they still barely made it out. Now, who makes the most sense to meet their end here? Well, with so much randomness in the scenario, it's really hard to pick objectively as I have no clue how they would even die. It's likely that any of the previous scenarios I mentioned are amplified by the stumbling and added confusion. But to kill any of our big names because of a random chance seems kind of off. Like, I'm obviously not going to kill Daryl randomly just because the conditions are a little harder. It doesn't really make much sense. So I'll just say it's Agatha who was killed here, since she was next to go canonically anyways. I was leaning toward Maggie meeting her end as well, since Negan left her to die and Shane might do something similar, but I feel like that scenario might happen differently, since now Daryl isn't running after Dog, meaning he'd be present, since Dog is dead in this version of events. So even if Shane tried that, Daryl would just save Maggie anyway. And that's not to mention Maggie also made it out despite Negan leaving her. Though maybe it's like Jesus who gets a Roy-like injury here if anyone. So we can now carry on, though I will warn you, almost everyone we have left on this squad is a fan favorite or a big character, and I'm looking at things from the most objective lens possible. More characters die very soon in the show, but some of them aren't here, so don't freak out if anyone you like meets a similar end soon. Going on, after a rough encounter with the walkers in the tunnel, our group makes it above ground. Shane warns the group not to let their guard down as the Reapers attack in the night and they hit fast. Maggie plans to detour to a radio tower in order to rest up and restock before they go to Meridian. I think it'd be neat to have Mika and Carl interact a bit, since Mika is obviously curious to know more about the new people she's meeting, especially why he has a beef with her father figure. Carl tries to connect with her, but struggles not to just bash Shane when asked about the bad he's done. Mika notices his attempt to connect though, and does seem to think he's a good person. The group gets attacked on the road by the Reapers, with Shane opting to defend Mika immediately. Now in this initial attack, Roy is immediately one-shot killed, and Cole is brutalized, along with Duncan being hit so many times that he dies later of his injuries. However, with Shane here to warn everybody of taking the road path where they'd be easy targets, I think we can cut one of these out. And given that Roy isn't here this time while Cole and Duncan are, I think let's cut out Roy's death. So Cole is killed, Duncan is brutally injured if not killed right there, and many of the others are injured. Gabriel, Aiden, and Negan all got hit, so I'll say Jesus, Carl, and Shane do in their place. Maggie ends up by herself, meeting up with Jesus at an abandoned building. They get jumped by Reapers, but luckily Shane arrives and helps take care of them in the nick of time. Sadly, Jesus is heavily injured after facing a previous injury in the tunnel, one during the initial Reaper strike, and now another. This is unfortunate for Maggie to see, as she doesn't want him to die like Alden and Beth did. All these people she left at Hilltop with so much time lost. Shane remarks that he lost Mika during the struggle, which gives him a reason to get going, even though he thinks Maggie's plan of the road is bad. They eventually run into Michonne, who got Duncan as far as she could before he died of his wounds. She's sad to see Jesus so hurt, but hasn't seen Mika. Luckily for us, we get to know that Carl is currently with Mika, as the two ended up losing the rest of the group. They work together to track down a dying Reaper, who recognizes Mika, asking her to pray for him, like they used to for their people. But Mika shoots him dead, saying that she's not one of them anymore. Carl is kind of surprised to see her be so cutthroat, but it's nice seeing the two bond and work together. Carl hasn't had this kind of feeling since he was with Enid all that time ago. When traveling in the forest, Shane notices the walkers in the woods are growing in number, and Michonne tells him that if he's scared, he can leave. But Maggie isn't so willing to let him off the hook, as he is only there to help them fight the Reapers, and they've just barely gotten started with that. Shane gets tired of all the hate, saying that he's been trying to help them this whole time. They're just not listening to him. Tell you what, Michonne, this is a suicide mission, alright? That guy you call Jesus we've been lugging around is your best? When we get there, they come at us, what am I supposed to throw him? Look at him, man! Michonne walks up to Shane, looking him in the eye, before saying that if he wants to find his girl, they should go to the spot Maggie told everyone about. They move on, getting attacked by the walkers. Michonne is surrounded like Agatha was canonically, but Jesus tries to help her out, as I think even while injured, he'd be a better fighter than Alden. Plus, Michonne is able to handle herself better than Agatha. With those two factors combined, I'll say that Jesus is the one bitten on the arm and not Michonne. They do all escape though, so they are better off than in the canon version. They make it to an empty church where the decision to cut off Jesus' arm is made, but he doesn't want that to happen. Shane was right. With his injuries, he's not going to make it to Meridian. And now with his bite, he definitely won't, whether he loses the arm or not. Jesus fights both Maggie and Michonne's protests, apologizing that he couldn't do more for them, but this is where the road ends. I think his death would matter more to me than Alden's did canonically, but that might just be because I'm the biggest Alden hater there is. As the trio leaves Jesus behind, Shane would probably say he did good before leaving. Just a small symbol of respect after Jesus gave him a bit of credit. It's also interesting to note that had Jesus stayed in his original outfit from his introduction, he probably wouldn't have been bitten through. Cause, you know, leather jackets are pretty awesome. At Alexandria, there's no Judith or RJ, so Gracie is kind of left alone, maybe being taken care of by Gabriel and Rosita at the time. I do think it'd be a neat idea to have her form a connection with Dante while he's locked up, like how Judith and Negan had one in the canon version of events. She wants to understand what's going on now that she's lost her father, and I think this would be a big step in that direction. Without Dog to help him, Daryl wouldn't be able to fight Carver as well as he did canonically, which was a close match even then. But more Reapers did show up, so it's likely that Daryl might just get caught sooner rather than killed. I do still think they'd capture him rather than ending him, as the Reapers did want info on the group. He just wouldn't have any sort of connection with Leah this time, which would change things for sure. Like, it's possible that Leah lets Carver waterboard Daryl a little bit longer, but I don't think it would make Daryl talk. At best, he'd just give the same lies he did canonically that Leah didn't buy. Daryl meets Frost again in the cells, with that going the same. Leah doesn't share her sadness with Daryl since she doesn't know him. Because of that, Daryl doesn't tell them anything until he sees what they did to Frost. He meets with Pope, giving him tiny shards of info, acting as if he didn't really know the group. The building on fire wouldn't happen since Leah doesn't vouch for Daryl. Pragmatically, she could, but I don't think she would without the connection. The only use I could see Pope or Leah having for him would be to get him to make Frost crack, since Frost would have more info in this facade Daryl is putting up. So that happens, and during that, Pope sees potential in Daryl himself and tests him with the burning building. At Alexandria, there'd be a walker breach, with Gabe and the others fighting them off. But without Lydia and Aaron present, it's a bit harder. Maybe this is where our bonus guys from the junkyard come in. Gabriel would torture and try to kill the Whisperer guy without Lydia to defend them. Carol still protests at the end though, leading to Gabriel snapping back to reality. Rosita tries to comfort Gracie, who feels alone, but she can only offer so much as she didn't really know Aaron all that well. In the woods, Shane suggests that both Michonne and Maggie start trusting him more, but they laugh at him. He says that Jesus literally said the same, and they just carry on ignoring him. After arriving at the house, Shane doesn't want to wait around, instead choosing to go out and look for Mika. Michonne and Maggie stay and wait, as that's the smarter option. Luckily, as he's about to go, Carl, Elijah, and Mika return, with everyone happy to see each other again. Carl is a bit wounded like Gabriel was, but nothing he can't recover from. Mika and Shane hug upon their reunion, and Mika tells him about her good time with Carl, with Shane saying that he's a good kid. The Reapers launch an attack on the house Frost gave them the hint toward, with Pope telling Leah to bring Daryl along as a way to see if he is truly useful. Now, we do have an issue that arises. In canon, our group had Maggie, Elijah, Gabriel, and Negan. Just 4 people, making it easy for them to flee the house just as the Reapers closed in. But with Gabriel and Negan being replaced by Carl and Shane, and then Mika and Michonne being there as well, it wouldn't be as easy. Not to mention, Leah and Daryl wouldn't be talking as much, so Leah would be spending more time searching. So as Carl opens the crawl space, he finds Michonne as the caboose, last to leave, and shoots her. Yeah, I know, it's crazy that Michonne would die here, but I don't see a way out for her. If she isn't killed instantly from the shot, she'd be chased down by the Reapers and killed anyway. So pick your poison. And my other options for deaths were Shane, Carl, and Mika, who all have been pretty essential parts of the story with plenty more to build on going forward. Michonne is the best option on who to kill off if I had to take out anyone, which seems like I do here realistically. Anyway, Michonne's death proves that this group is here, so Leah puts a radio call out for everyone to follow them, meaning our group is on the run. Daryl is in no position to stop them yet, so he follows Leah and Carver, hoping to find some way to prevent anyone else from dying. While running, Shane wants to suggest a path for our group to follow, but he knows no one's going to listen to him, so he just splits off randomly from the others, causing Mika and Carl to follow behind him. They catch up, with him saying the exact reasoning I just gave for why he did that, before making the two hush up. They hear the Reaper's footsteps as Fish, Washington, and Powell begin approaching. Shane creates the plan for each of the 3 of them to get the jump on each Reaper, giving signals Mika would get from her time with him, while Carl struggles a bit. Because of this, Shane and Mika are able to take their guys out, whereas Carl is unable to. This causes Shane to rush in and help fight him off, getting a cut in the process. He does save Carl's life though, which Carl isn't really sure how to grapple with. Shane knows this though, and doesn't expect any thank yous as he helps the boy up. At the same time, Maggie and Elijah are now alone, surrounded by Carver, Leah, and Daryl. Elijah starts a fight with Carver, prompting Daryl to step in and stab Carver before he kills Elijah. This blows his cover, but now Maggie aims her gun at Leah, with Daryl wanting to take her as a hostage. It might be the only way to beat Pope and the rest. Shane, Mika, and Carl now show up to meet the others, and also Daryl too. Shane and Mika see Leah and immediately start getting emotional. Shane tries to fight it, and they have Leah radio that everything's alright, they just got held back in a fight. They're on their way now. Since they don't have a former Whisperer on their squad, they instead have to find a place to store Leah and rest before making their way to Meridian. During this time, Shane and Leah talk, with Shane doing his best work to get Leah on their side, but it just doesn't succeed. She does mention something that he doesn't know though. Megan is alive. The night Shane and Mika escaped, they found the others in the woods, killed them, but spared Megan. It was Pope's idea. Pope thought she'd be good to keep, train up their way without Shane's interference. So now if Shane wants to win this, he's going to need to use Leah as a hostage, send Mika into a war zone, and be willing to kill Megan. She suggests he find a way to undo whatever it is his group is about to do, and then run, like he did before. Shane rubs his head, scoffs, and walks away from her. At a similar time, Daryl is scouting ahead like Gabriel did in canon, since if he gets caught, he can blend in as one of them. He runs into the priest guy, shooting him with his crossbow, as there's no reason to leave him alive like Gabriel did. Meanwhile, Carl approaches Shane to talk about what's been going on, and the two actually seem to bond a bit. Shane tries to help Carl through losing Michonne, and to use that anger against the Reapers. He's probably seen it all out there. I mean, so much they had to take an eye out, right? This won't hurt him for long. Carl understands Shane is trying to help, but doesn't really like the matter-of-fact tone he's giving. So he leaves Shane alone, instead going to talk with Mika. She tries to relate to Carl as she's lost a lot of people she knew too, like her mom, dad, Tara, Megan, her sister. The two hug, clearly growing closer during this mission, which is really sweet. On his way back home, Daryl finds a guy trying to get back to his family. He tells them that his wife isn't gonna make it, and that he and his son should run. He then gives them the general direction of Alexandria, but doesn't want to risk giving up even more information, as if they get caught by the Reapers, they'll be able to track it down. Daryl then returns to the group, catching a bit of rest before nightfall. At that time, the group heads out to attack the Reapers' settlement. They use what few walkers they can gather without using Whisperer masks, but ultimately it's not much. Daryl radios to Pope that he's almost there, but that they got jumped by the others. He's the only survivor that he knows of. This allows him to show up and cause a bit of a distraction before Maggie and the others attack. Wells would still be around Meridian since there isn't a big herd this time. At Alexandria, Connie and Virgil have returned, and Gracie is left alone during the storm as there is no Judith. Because there's no Judith, Gracie would be saved from the Window Walker by Virgil instead. With Daryl on the inside and a few walkers on the outside, the Reapers are a bit distracted as Maggie and Carl move around the side. They're missing Fish, Washington, and Powell, so they have less guards, meaning Daryl's presence isn't necessary. Daryl can't bust a lock sadly as he's too busy being grilled by Pope, who is not buying his story anymore. He goes out on one mission and now the whole troop is gone? This has gotta be a trap. So he prepares to kill Daryl while he radios the others to be on full alert and search everywhere. Shane and Mika travel separately from Maggie and Carl in order to remain hidden better. The few walkers are dealt with quite easily, as Pope has tied Daryl to a chair and goes to end him. But that doesn't really work, as I think if Maggie can fight Leah while tied to a chair, Daryl can definitely fight Pope tied to a chair. And Pope literally has no feats because he never did anything on screen. What a great villain. So I do think Daryl could likely defeat him, or at the very least escape after a tussle. With the Reapers on high alert, Maggie and Carl have a harder time getting in. They both may have to fight a Reaper, causing some injury. At the same time, Shane and Mika have the same issue, but the Reaper they run into is Megan, whom Mika doesn't want to fight against. Now Shane would normally see this as an easy issue to overcome, as it's not like Megan would be stronger than him. But now that he's seen how Mika has changed, it's harder for him. The two take Megan down, but she has been so brainwashed that they can't really get her to stop fighting. So Mika is forced to knock her unconscious, symbolizing her growth since Lizzie. She's willing to say goodbye to another lost sister. The two go forward as Maggie crashes a truck into their gate, causing any nearby walkers to start entering. The Hwacha would never be fired without Pope there to order it. Carl takes Gabriel's sniper position and keeps the Reapers off of Maggie and the others. At Alexandria, things are quite bleak without Lydia. Gracie going to get a weapon is now a death wish, as walkers flood in and chase her into the lowest room. With no Judith or Aaron to defend her, or Lydia to find her, she gets pulled into the water and devoured by walkers. Gabriel shows up just as this happens, sadly being unable to save her as well. It's possible the flooding from the storm drowns Dante in his cell, but I'm gonna say he survives. No Hwacha means our group really doesn't face much issue besides actually fighting the Reapers. But since they have greater numbers and the Reapers have lower numbers than in canon, it's a much easier fight as well. By the morning, the only member left is Megan, who recovered and refuses to let anyone take over. She aims a gun at the group as they try to loot this place and cries as she yells at them. Shane tries to reason with her, saying that she can come home now, but it just doesn't work. Mika steps up herself, making a final attempt to convince Meg to stop all this, as they don't have to fight anymore. All of them can be together again. Megan finally lowers her gun slowly as Mika talks, before the two hug. This shows Shane that Mika, having been influenced by Maggie and the others, is a good thing overall. He isn't quite there yet, but maybe he could be one day. And with that, the group grabs all the food and supplies at Meridian and heads back home. But first, they stop by the church to put down and bury Jesus. Wow, that's a crazy sentence, but we continue. They also return to where they left Leah, deciding what to do with her. Shane recognizes that he won't be able to get her to switch sides, even after telling her how well things went, how they could just pick up where things left off. She just isn't going to budge. So he lets her go in the middle of the night, mirroring how she saved him from the Reapers all that time ago. Before they arrive at Alexandria, Shane has one final talk with Carl, apologizing for what he did to his father. It took time for him to see it, but them working together is what took down the unstoppable force that was the Reapers. Maybe his dad was right all along. He knows that he can't ever make up for what he did to him, Maggie, Daryl. So he's not going to wait around and find out what happens to him when they make it back to Alexandria. He got his girls to a safe place, and that's the most important thing to him right now. He wishes Carl the best before leaving the group, going off on his own as everyone else returns to Alexandria. Following Carl and the others return from their successful mission at Meridian, Alexandria is approached by Lance Hornsby of the Commonwealth to join their community. Carl and the rest of the council agree to this, but Maggie refuses, retreating to Hilltop. Not much would really change for the Commonwealth, to be honest, except that Judith and RJ aren't there, which makes joining the community a more of a moving on situation for Daryl and Carl. Aaron is essentially replaced with Carl 1-to-1 as he's got a similar temperament and we've built up his bond and dynamic with Gabriel before this point. The one issue with that is that Aaron was given more of an opportunity with scouring after they found out about his prior occupations. But they did already seem interested in Aaron before that, and they being the Commonwealth, of course. Also, with Carl being the leader of Alexandria and being very cooperative thus far, I think they'd be fine with him. Plus, it would help to get Gabriel in. Now, Lydia's death actually makes a pretty solid impact. The place Toby Carlson raided was only found out by Maggie after Lydia convinced her to follow the lead they were given. No one else had a strong voice on this issue, so without her, no one would have investigated. By the way, we're just going to go ahead and get Shane reintroduced into the story as he has joined Riverbend and married Annie. Very similar to what Negan did whenever he was gone during the time skip. He's the one who sent the message to Maggie this time, which was essentially rejected. He and Annie then go into the apartment complex and save Gabriel before Shane charges Toby to ensure Carl's survival. This is before Toby realizes the gun is empty, so all Shane sees is Carl about to get shot, and he jumps into action. After hitting him with his crowbar, Shane gets shot at by the other soldiers who started closing in. He and Carl run away, but Carl is hit by a bullet as they escape. Toby gets up with a big gash in his face from the attack, ordering all of his soldiers to hunt their enemies down. With Shane and Carl now on the run, their only option is to head to Hilltop as it's the closest spot they can request help from. They are heavily outmanned and outgunned here. However, without Maggie investigating herself, it would be a really long time before they arrive at Hilltop and then make it back in time to help. Due to their lower weaponry and person count, they wouldn't be able to distract Toby from finding their hideout spot, meaning all of the unnamed members would be gunned down by him and his men. Gabriel and Annie are able to escape the complex this time, as that is now their only option. Meanwhile, Shane and Carl are chased down by the Commonwealth soldiers, knowing that their demise is coming pretty soon. But luckily, Toby Carlson pulls the dudes chasing them in order to flank the recent escapees. It's better to get some of them, especially those who have seen more, than to try and hunt everyone and split their forces. This allows Shane to then take the injured Carl back to Hilltop safely and inform Maggie of what's going on. Carl is taken to rest while Maggie gets Elijah going with Shane in their car to check out the scene. Just as Gabriel and Annie are caught by Carlson and his team, Maggie rams into his goons with her car before Shane starts gunning down the others and Elijah engages in close combat with his blades. They get Carlson as the last one left, trying to crawl away, but Shane shoots him after making sure Annie is alright. After losing all their people and their base being a target of the Commonwealth, Shane and Annie have nowhere to go. They regroup with Carl, and both he and Gabriel try to cover up the story to Lance. But it's a bit more believable since Carl was shot and all of the people in Riverbend are visibly dead. So Lance can have his suspicions, but what kind of story would he really have? Carl and Gabriel helped kill everyone on both sides? Why? Lance speculates that there might be more of this group out there, so he has his soldiers check and inform other communities to let them know. Because Herschel wasn't at Riverbend, he wouldn't have lost his hat. This means Lance probably wouldn't talk to him as much and the big scene they caused would never happen. It's possible Maggie doesn't trust Shane with Herschel since he never saved him like Negan did. But what Shane did to her father is further removed from what Negan did, and the two had way more time working together. Plus, Shane has shown his loyalty from time to time by saving Carl. Daryl, Gabriel, and Carl are forced to fight the Commonwealth soldiers they've been assigned with. Lance hires Leah to kill Maggie and wipe out Hilltop. Since Maggie is responsible for Leah's family being wiped out still, she'd still have a vendetta against her. Again, since Lydia isn't here, I don't see Elijah going against Maggie. This means he would retreat after being told to do so by her. So Maggie would have to deal with all of the soldiers left as well as Leah alone. But it wouldn't make much difference as I'm sure Leah would abandon her squad to hunt Maggie alone and capture her. After Elijah returns to the hideout, he informs Shane of Leah's attack and heads out to save Maggie and confront Leah. Maggie has a better defense against Leah as she didn't kill her people out of rage, they just genuinely had to fight them to the end. Luckily for her though, Shane makes it to their location, killing Leah before Daryl shows up shortly after. The three escape Lance's attacks and reunite with the rest of the group. Shane joins the Commonwealth as a person unrelated to the conflict and blends in. Inside he finds Mika and Megan and the two are excited to see him. He tries to hold them off from looking too suspicious though, asking where Carol is. They meet up and Shane explains the situation before the two go looking through files to find blueprints. Jerry wouldn't be defending the kids since sadly Judith and Gracie are both dead and RJ was never born. Just like in the last part, the Negan scenes work pretty much perfectly for Shane. A key example is when he and Carol find Sebastian hiding out. After Lance is caught, walkers attack the crowd at the Commonwealth, killing Sebastian. Because of this, Eugene is hunted down along with Max. By this time, Carl, Jerry, and Elijah have left to warn Oceanside of what's going on. However, Jerry gets injured and they're forced to stop at a place Jerry calls Kingdom 2.0. They eventually get swarmed by walkers, but everything goes fine since they cut away from this pretty quickly and everyone's alright. The next episode also goes exactly the same, with Lance being killed by Carol. Shane, Annie, Ezekiel, and most of the others are captured and sent to the working camps. Ezekiel wouldn't despise Shane nearly as much as Negan, since his bad actions were long before the original group had met him. However, he would also still be reeling from Michonne's death since they were a little bit closer in this timeline. It's also interesting that Dante might be there since he was locked up in Alexandria where one of the camps is. So he'd have to work with the others, slightly redeeming himself in the process, but besides some minor dialogue and role swaps, nothing will really be changed in the last few episodes. Shane makes a final attempt to sacrifice himself, but it backfires before Daryl and the others come in to save them. And then they all take on Pamela and her army at the end. Lydia is already dead, so she doesn't lose her arm, and the finale goes mostly the same. The one key change is that Judith is dead too, so she can't be shot. But instead, it would probably be Mika who takes the shot for Maggie. Shane, Megan, and Maggie would freak out about this as they all rush out of the battle scene. Shane carries Mika, fleeing from the swarm of the undead. He gives his blood to Mika at the hospital, assuming he has the right type. If not, Daryl's blood works with all types, so we would just do the canon version instead. But it would be really sick for a full circle thing for Shane to do for Mika what Rick did for Carl in season 2. I'll say it's Shane because of that, and so that we don't have to keep both him and Daryl at the hospital when Negan is supposed to be with Maggie. I mean, if both of them might be doing the same thing, I kinda can't let either of them leave. So we'll just say it's Shane. So since Shane is at the hospital here, we'll say Daryl is with Maggie. Another cool moment would be Shane dragging Mika around the hospital, very reminiscent of that flashback at the start of the outbreak with Rick. In fact, I could see sort of like a flashback recreation of that, like how they do in season 9 when Shane and Rick have their recreation of their first scene together. Or at least besides the one where Rick gets shot. Daryl tries to convince Maggie not to hunt down Pamela the way that she is, saying that it won't be good for her. Now that Carl has returned to the group, he says the same thing. Other than these changes, I feel that everything else will remain the same for the ending of the show. With Carl and Daryl there, I think Pamela would still live, but be in prison. I don't think Maggie would forgive Shane, but she doesn't want to dislike him. It's pretty much the exact same as with Negan. Shane has his family now, and Mika has become kind of like hers, so she can't force him out. Now, despite Michonne and Rick being dead at this point, I do still see Daryl leaving. The way it's framed is that Daryl obviously wanted to find Rick, but Maggie was heavily suggesting that they need to see what else is out there in the world. I mean, they went so long without knowing about this huge community of the Commonwealth, 50,000 people. She even talks to Daryl himself about this, suggesting that there's a connection there. And with Judith, Michonne, Lydia, and Aaron all sadly dead, Daryl doesn't have many people he's super close to left. This would likely make it even less of an issue for him to leave, even without the added incentive of maybe finding Rick. This means the events of Daryl Dixon would go almost identically, with the exception of Carol telling Daryl someone came back. So I guess that would just never happen. As for the ones who live, I guess literally everything changes since Rick and Michonne are not there and they are the characters. The CRM would continue their reign over the people and further their plan to wipe out all other communities, even those allied to them. Jadis would remain silent about Virginia and its many groups, but still visit Gabriel every year. Now last is Dead City, which is a bit tricky to take on with Negan being absent. Firstly, would Shane kill those guys for messing with Annie? Absolutely. Would Shane send his wife and son away to save them? Absolutely. Would he form a bond with Ginny? Well, given his similar relationships with Carl, Mika, and Megan, yeah, absolutely. So he'd be on the run from the marshals of New Babylon, but this is where things get a little bit wonky. Herschel was stolen by the Croat, who did it as a means of trading for Negan due to their history. He would obviously not have any interest in Shane because he doesn't know who he is. Because of this, the Croat would either A, not engage Maggie's new group, or B, go the savior route of extorting resources from them, which was hinted to us. In that kind of position of power, I don't see the Croat not taking advantage of it, but Maggie would likely just flee with her people. Hunting down Shane of all people and saying, let's go to New York and kick this guy's butt alone would just be really stupid, whereas with Negan it made sense. It's kind of like how people were critiquing the show for being like, why does Maggie team up with Negan after what he did? That would pretty much just be this, but with Shane. Except actually happening and not like the original show where it actually made sense. They likely just go back to the Commonwealth where they have thousands of people to defend with if the Barazzi or the Marshals decided to hunt them down that badly. It is kind of underwhelming to see not much change near the end of the story, and what does change is mostly just a character isn't here, so this plotline or story never happens. With Daryl and Dead City going on their second seasons, it's possible we have more to talk about in the future. But for now, this is pretty much the end of What If Shane Killed Rick. Sadly, we have multiple cliffhangers like will the Doma or the Marshals engage our main group? Will Shane ever reunite with Annie and his son? Will the CRM eventually find and wipe out our group? But I don't think any of these questions will ever be answered, sadly. Even if I cover what happens in the next few seasons of this franchise, how will I ever know whether the CRM would find out about the Commonwealth? In the canon universe, the CRM is entirely destroyed, so my only assumption is that left unchecked, they would eventually find our group and, well, you know. But then again, Rick and Michonne wiped out the entire army alone in a day, so maybe our group has hope. As for Dead City and its shenanigans, the story takes place in New York and it seems like Season 2 will do the same. So unless Maggie gets back to our main group at some point or Daryl finds out about what's going on, I doubt any of those groups are going to find ours. And same for Daryl, but just in France. But anyway, I do actually want to talk about the series and some of the scrapped ideas I had for you loyal fans of the series. As you guys probably know, I pride myself in delivering the most realistic telling of events in these stories. It's what you guys are asking for when you ask, what if this happened? You want to know what would have happened. Because of that, there were a few opportunities that, had I actually been writing the show itself, I probably would have done more with. So let's go ahead and start at the very beginning. All the way back in part 1, I mentioned that Shane is staying with the group is one of the biggest thoughts most people have in these types of what-ifs, but realistically that just wasn't in the cards. His plan just wasn't as good as he was hoping. And perhaps eventually I'll make some type of story where Shane wins and stays with them, as I think the story would have gone a bit differently there. But at the same time, I'm very grateful I didn't go that route, because it led to some pretty awesome stuff for Shane to do on his own. His connection to the governor in Woodbury, kidnapping Daryl, killing Herschel and Andrea, and even the governor himself felt super strong. His relationship with Andrea was a perfect continuation from Season 2 and actually made it feel like it meant something, whereas in Season 2 it was just kind of random. And the end of the governor arc felt like a great close as well. All of our major characters from Seasons 1 and 2, with a few from 3, came together in an ultimate clash. This eventually led to Shane building a new family with Tara, Bob, Megan, and Mika. And I loved writing how his group basically went through the events of Season 4 because our group was way ahead of them. The hospital story felt like it was a perfect fit for Shane, and the Reapers were a great follow-through on his past stories and how Shane can't control everything. It was also a great way to get him back involved with our main group through Maggie essentially replacing Negan since he died, as you guys saw. But with our handful of assorted characters now dead or alive, it was very interesting to see them interact and collide. My main gripe, which is also with the main show, is with Season 11. I love the Reaper arc for this what if, but it felt like some things weren't properly followed up on due to the nature of the Commonwealth story. For one, most of our main characters were either still alive, like Daryl and Rosita, easily replaced by a character we have now, like Aaron and Negan with Carl and Shane, or sadly unimportant like Judith and Lydia. Because of that, it didn't really seem like there were any major alterations after the Reaper arc. The final arc of the show is so mind-numbingly segmented, so I really couldn't do much for any of the extra characters or missing ones. I wanted Dante, Megan, and Mika to all be important in Season 11. I wrote them beforehand as if they would be. But when reviewing the Commonwealth arc again, it just wasn't in the cards. For Dante, I'm glad I could at least get him in on the last few episodes, but I didn't really say much specifically because I have no idea what he would really do or how anyone would truly react to him. Is he now reformed after having like almost no screen time, so all of that happens off screen? Or is he still struggling, in which case do we really cram that character arc into these last few episodes while everybody else is already doing the exact same things? It's just really hard. There isn't enough wiggle room in this overly packed story, which is how I feel with the original Season 11. As for Mika, I wanted her to have more to do after being so important in the last arc, but the only way to do that would be for her to not be at the Commonwealth. But taking Megan there only to leave her with a group she doesn't know would be terrible. The best place for Megan is the Commonwealth, as she needs to be reinstated to a society that isn't treating her the way the Reapers did, and Hilltop just isn't safe. So she couldn't be anywhere but there, and thus the same is for Mika. I did think about having Mika at Hilltop due to her connection with Maggie, and she would just essentially replace Lydia. But the issue there is that I built up Carl and Mika's romance, so Elijah would either not build as much connection, or we would scrap that entirely for him instead. But like I said, Mika would have to be with Megan, so even that idea wouldn't have worked. And lastly is Megan herself, who likely would have been taken in by Magna and her group as one of them, as I could totally see their connection. Megan wanting the Commonwealth's corruption to be exposed would work after living with the Reapers. But sadly, she doesn't have any connection to our more core cast, so there just isn't really much for her to do. As for the rest of this franchise, I already spoke at length about the sad future this leaves this what if in. But yeah guys, that's the end of What If Shane Killed Rick, unless Dead City and Daryl Dixon Season 2 completely change things, or like in a couple years we get more Walking Dead content that completely changes things. That's pretty much going to be the end. I hope you guys have enjoyed this wild ride. I know it was long, both in length and also how long it took us to actually finish the series, but we worked really hard to try and get it to the end for you guys. As always, a huge shout out to our channel members, LA to Plug 2, Paul Keen, Hazy Brush, Marco De Cinco, Davisville 84, Willie, Very Classy Demon, 23 Days Later, Aiden Kearns, Zombie Warlord, Yeah, Tifu A, Joel, and Chief Constituent. If you want to have your name read out at the end of the video and also get awesome perks like exclusive community posts, priority comment replies, and early videos, then make sure to become a channel member for just $2.99 a month. It really helps support the channel, and we appreciate it a lot. But as always, tell me if you like this series, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.